Chapter 14. The Haven of Success. "Can I help you?" Violet had arrived at the Crown Hotel and was standing in the foyer admiring a painting of a windmill. An attractive young woman popped her head up from beneath the counter where she had been cleaning. "Oh, you startled me," said Violet, clutching her chest. "I was somewhere in that scene," she explained, gesturing towards the picture. "Lovely, isn't it?" said the girl. "Father bought it from the auction house only last month, and everybody seems pleased with it. It cheers the place up, don't you think? Much more than the item in the cabinet below." Violet moved her hand across the glass-topped cupboard and peered at the rifle inside. The highly polished wooden gun bore the inscription, H. Holland. "It's a paradox," said the girl. "My father's pride and joy." "Paradox? It fires both shot and solid projectile, but don't ask Father about it unless you have a lot of free time." Violet nodded and moved closer to the counter. "I have reserved a room," she said. The girl turned a page in the hotel register. "Name?" she asked. "Violet Smith." "Yes, here it is. How many nights are you staying?" "I'm not sure yet," said Violet. "1, possibly 2. "Have you eaten yet?" asked the girl. "Not since breakfast, and I'm famished." Violet had struggled to sleep in Michael's unfamiliar lodgings and had risen early, breakfasting before 7 o'clock. Between the journey and sending Lawrence's telegrams, she hadn't found time for lunch. "Would you like an evening meal? We've got mutton pie on the menu tonight. It's my favourite dish." Violet's stomach rumbled in anticipation. "Yes, dinner would be lovely. Here's your key. You're in room number 5 on the first floor. I will make your table up for 6 o'clock. Oh, and there's a telegram for you." Violet raised her eyes heavenwards as she took the telegram and noted the sender. She tucked it into her pocket and climbed the staircase to the first floor of the building. Room number 5 was on the right-hand side of the corridor at the far end. She dropped her carpet-bag and inserted the heavy iron key into the lock. It turned, and she entered a small room containing a single bed, a narrow wardrobe, and a dressing table. Dark velvet curtains framed a square window overlooking St. Nicholas Street. Violet sat on the end of the bed, reached into her pocket, and withdrew the telegram. She slit it open and frowned. "No, I won't give you any more information by telegram, Lawrence," she said aloud. "It is too much." She put the telegram on the dressing table, unpacked her few possessions, and hung her spare dress in the wardrobe. Then she watched the busy street from the window for a few moments, yawned loudly, and lay on the bed for a short rest before dinner. Violet woke at 6:15, taking a few moments to remember where she was and what she ought to be doing. She freshened up and bolted downstairs, arriving in the dining room just before 6:30. Violet located a small table in the corner of the room. She was barely seated when a young woman clad in a black dress and white apron arrived carrying a notebook and a pencil. "Dinner or cold cuts?" she asked. "Dinner, please," said Violet. "You can have beef stew or mutton pie, with treacle tart or rice pudding to follow," said the girl. Violet made her selection, and the waitress licked her pencil and scribbled on the notepad in a spidery hand. "I won't be long," she said cheerily, looking over her shoulder as she bustled towards the kitchen. Violet picked up her book and opened it at the page marked with a red ribbon. She was just getting lost in the story again when a buzz of noise preceded a procession of colourfully dressed men. They were walking past the dining room on their way to their meeting next door. Violet tried not to stare at their insignia and brightly coloured sashes and aprons. One man, who seemed to be the leader, wore a bright blue sash and a chain around his collar. The others sported silk tassels in shades of red and yellow, which hung from double-curved flaps on their white aprons bearing an open hand atop a golden ball. The rumble of noise dissipated from the corridor and passed into the next room as the men walked by. Violet tried to resume her reading, but the noise was so loud that it disturbed her concentration. Violet's chair was immediately next to the adjoining room, and the monotonous tones of what sounded like a treasurer's report rumbled through the wall. She debated moving tables, but closed her book with a sigh and waited for dinner to arrive. The waitress was as good as her word and delivered Violet's mutton pie quickly. "Noisy lot, aren't they?" she said, placing the hot plate on the tablecloth. "Freemasons, I suppose?" asked Violet, thinking of Francis and his regalia. "Odd fellows," said the waitress. "It's different." "Oh, I've heard the name Oddfellows recently," said Violet. "I think there is a lodge in Bury St. Edmunds." "There are lodges everywhere," said the waitress. "We have two in Dis, the Loyal Nelson Lodge and this one." She waved her hands towards the wall. "These gentlemen are members of the Loyal Haven of Success." "I love the unusual names. What do they do?" "They are a friendly society, miss. They look after each other." "A charitable organisation?" "Yes, that too. But the Oddfellows see each other right when times are hard or when someone dies." "Oh, I see, like a burial club." "Yes, miss. Similar to the Freemasons. Lots of secrecy and strange ceremonies, so I hear. Have you met my father, Mr. Panks?" "Not yet. He's a Mason," she said, crossing her arms and nodding her head as if to make a point. "But not an Oddfellow. No, anyway, eat your dinner, miss, before it goes cold." The mutton pie was every bit as good as Minnie had said. Violet was full and sleepy by the time she'd devoured the treacle tart, but had arranged to meet Michael after dinner and waited for him in the lounge. The room was empty when Violet arrived, and she tried to read again before another interruption stopped her. It was not to be. A heavy-set man bowled into the room, panting with exertion. He pulled a handkerchief from his pocket, wiped his brow, and placed a large leather satchel onto the table. It knocked against an ashtray, which clattered to the floor. "Oh, damn and blast it!" said the man, not appearing to notice Violet, who was sitting quietly by the window. He pulled out a fob watch, checked the time, and tutted loudly. Violet gave a gentle cough, hoping to head off another outburst, and he looked up with a start. Sorry, I didn't see you there. What must you think of me?" Violet smiled. "Please don't worry. Bad language," he said, collapsing onto the chair, "is unforgivable, especially in front of a lady." "Well, I do forgive you," she said, "so there is nothing to worry about." He peered at his watch again. "There is," he said. "I'm late, very late. Now, where is it?" He rifled through the bag and pulled out a shiny medallion on a blue silk fob. "There's my beauty," he said, holding it aloft. "What is it?" "A members' jewel for the Oddfellows East Anglia Unity. There is a presentation here tonight," he said, closing the bag and depositing it in the corner of the room. "And Muggins here forgot to bring the most important thing. I've run a mile and back again to fetch it." "They were still making speeches when I came in here a few moments ago," said Violet. "You should have plenty of time." "Yes, good." He gave his florid complexion one more wipe with the handkerchief, put 2 fingers to his head in an informal salute, and left the room. Violet smiled. The man must have been in his early 50s, too young to be senile, but undoubtedly eccentric. His manner was endearing, and his membership of an organization that went by the name of the Oddfellows entirely befitted his character. She finally managed to finish a chapter of her book before Michael arrived. "Sorry I'm late," he said. "The Reverend John has taken ill. Some unexpected paperwork to finish." "It's no trouble," said Violet. "I've had quite an entertaining evening so far." "You must tell me about it," said Michael. "But first I need a drink. Would you like one?" Michael's return from the bar coincided with the mass exodus of the Oddfellows from the second dining room. By the time he joined her, the lounge was full, and he could barely see her through the crowd of brightly dressed men. With typical foresight, Violet had placed her book on the adjoining seat, saving it for Michael. He squeezed through the throng and sat beside her. "Sorry," she said. "It will be hard to talk with all this noise. Perhaps we should find somewhere quieter." Michael was about to answer when a man approached them and thrust his hand out. "Reverend Farrow, how are you?" he boomed. "Very well, Harry. How's that young son of yours? Happy now his little horse has been returned. Sorry, Harry, where are my manners? Let me introduce you to Miss Smith. Violet is an old friend of mine. She is staying at the Crown tonight. Violet, this is Harry Aldrich, proprietor of the auction house and father of little William. Violet offered her hand. And your little lad likes horses? What did you say? Harry struggled to hear over the chatter in the small room. Your little boy, does he like horses? A particular horse, said Harry with a twinkle. A wooden one. He left it in the butcher's shop. Michael found it and asked around until he discovered who owned it. Then he returned it to my youngest. How kind, said Violet. It's noisy in here, said Harry, and will get worse, no doubt. He nodded towards a group of men in the corner, each clasping a jug of ale with a spare one set aside on the table. We're sitting in a quieter area in the other room. Would you care to join us? Michael looked towards Violet and raised an eyebrow. She nodded. Thank you, he shouted towards Harry. They rose and followed Harry Aldrich into the second, more substantial dining room, where 3 men sat around a square table near an open door leading to the rear yard. An elderly collie dog snuffled beside one of the men, who Violet recognized from earlier. Ah, he said, my nemesis returns to haunt me over my careless words. Not at all, she said. You met Joseph, then? Asked Harry. Once met, never forgotten. Joseph bowed his head with a satisfied smile. Miss Smith, Michael, this is George Fairweather. You've met Joseph, and you know Arthur, don't you? Michael offered his hand to the wiry, dark-haired man seated by the door, who returned the gesture. Good to see you again, he said. In happier circumstances. We were talking about Tom earlier. Yes, poor chap. Violet, do you remember me mentioning the coachman with the ill wife when we were in Overstrand? Unfortunately, Tom's wife succumbed to the effects of consumption despite our prayers. We will see him right, said Arthur. He is one of us. The money won't heal his heart, brother, said Harry, but it will feed his children. There are not enough funds in the society to feed all yours, eh, George? Quipped Joseph, lightening the mood. Do you have many children? Asked Violet. Only 18, said Joseph before George could reply. That is a lot of mouths to feed. Arthur is halfway to catching me. George Fairweather growled as he gulped his pint. He was the only one at the table drinking alcohol. 9 and 1 on the way, said Arthur proudly. I'll name him after you if it's a boy. George scowled. Don't bother. Or Grace for a girl. That's pretty, said Violet. Steady on, said Harry Aldrich as George knocked back the last of his pint. This obsession with temperance is making you boring, George replied, slamming the tankard onto the wooden tabletop. And closer to God, said Harry. Are you all in the Temperance League? Violet asked. I'm not, said Arthur, but I don't drink at unity meetings out of respect. It is not compulsory, said Harry. Most of the men in the bar like a few drinks. I don't mind being around drinkers, although I don't indulge myself. He's a Methodist, you say? Said Joseph, as if the two things went hand in hand. Tell me about the Odd Fellows, said Violet. Michael grimaced. That might not be possible, he said. We're not so secretive now, laughed Harry. Once upon a time, a response to that question would be strictly forbidden. Some friendly societies were banned. The Oddfellows survived, but the movement was riven apart with factional splits and secessions. We're more modern now, and although we don't discuss our oaths and rituals outside the organization, we acknowledge their existence. And we have recently opened a ladies' lodge. Violet nodded approvingly. What brings you to Dis? Asked Arthur Thompson. I'm visiting Michael, she said. You've come a long way to go to church, said Joseph, tickling the dog behind his ears. But not to see a friend, said Violet. Michael is not only a man of God. I have another purpose in Dis. I am looking for someone, she continued. Well, you've come to the right place, said Joseph. We know everything about everyone. Harry's family have been here since Noah built the ark. Good, she said, though the person I seek may be dead, so forgive me if my inquiries sound insensitive, and what I need to ask about happened a long time ago, so I am led to believe. What was that? A woman called Fanny Nunn. I think she may have drowned. I wondered if it was by accident. The table fell silent. Only the soft pant of the dog was audible as the men glanced uneasily towards Violet. She bit her lip. "Sorry, have I spoken out of turn? Please forgive me." Harry Aldrich picked up his glass and sipped the water, then licked his lips as he considered his reply. "You were right. It happened a long time ago, but Fanny's death has bothered me for many years. She did not die naturally. Somebody killed her, and I heard her drown. My father and we listened to those terrible screams as we tried to help her, but we couldn't save her. Even now, after all this time, her pitiful cries still haunt me." Chapter 15. Inside Walton Jail. From the moment Lawrence decided to visit William Miller, he agonized over how he was going to access the jail. Neither Tom Strettle nor any of the other policemen were likely to help. Quite the contrary, and he couldn't go wandering in and expect a welcome. There were strict rules in place about visiting prisoners, and notorious inmates accused of murder were even more closely monitored. Lawrence considered arriving at the prison unannounced and bribing the guard. It wouldn't be the first time he had used that tactic, but it was fraught with risk. It wasn't until he returned to his uncle's house, having posted the third telegram to Violet, that an idea presented itself. It was a plausible plan, coming as the result of his uncle's latest obsession. "What do you think of this, my boy?" Uncle Frederick had asked as Lawrence entered the drawing room. Frederick was standing in front of a teak stand, holding the ugliest-looking black box that Lawrence had ever seen. "What is it?" he asked, staring at the glass lens set into a hole in the center of the box. "It's a Kodak," said his uncle proudly. "I'm still none the wiser." "A camera, my boy, for taking photographs." Lawrence examined the box doubtfully, noting a red string that dangled from a brass-colored fitting. The contraption looked more like a decorated bird box than a mechanism designed to produce an image. "Stand there," said his uncle, directing Lawrence towards the window where Connie was posing in an evening gown. "Now, squeeze together." Lawrence complied, trying to produce a smile that did not look artificial and forced. Uncle Frederick pulled a string, then tripped a button on the left-hand side of the device. A mechanism inside emitted a gentle whir. "Can I see it?" asked Lawrence. "You can pick it up if you like." "Not the camera," said Lawrence. "I meant the picture." "Oh, my dear boy, no. That is not how it works, not at all. Once the film is full, I send the box to Kodak. Then they print the photographs and return the camera. It's jolly clever." "How long does it take?" "That depends. This film has the capacity for 100 photographs. It will take a good few months to use them and another 3 weeks for processing." "How many photographs do you take a week?" Lawrence asked. "1 or 2. "Then it will take most of the year before you see the fruits of your efforts. You will have forgotten what was on the film." Uncle Frederick pursed his lips. "I expect that will be half the fun of it," he said. "Don't you approve?" "It's not for me to have an opinion," said Lawrence, hoping he had not offended, "as long as you enjoy your photography." "Look what it does," said his uncle, hobbling towards an armchair. He knelt, pushed his walking cane under one side of the chair and gave it a push. A large box emerged from the other side. Uncle Frederick retrieved it, opened the lid, and pulled out a clutch of black and white images which he passed to Lawrence. The round images were grainy, but a clear representation of Uncle Frederick and Lawrence's father. "When were these taken?" asked Lawrence, surprised. "I have never seen them." "Back in 1888, when Lionel last visited. We had them done by a professional photographer. I was so impressed that I bought a camera myself." "If these devices become readily available, photographers will go out of business," said Lawrence. "I'm surprised you don't make use of a camera yourself, given your occupation." "How could I? They're cumbersome and slow to operate." "Not all. Hand-held cameras have been around for over a decade, and Stern's patent concealed vest camera is now available in England." Lawrence considered the value of purchasing one. "I can see how it might be useful," he admitted. "It would have helped Violet with her cuckolded husband case. She got there in the end, but a photograph would have provided compelling evidence. I will give it further thought." "Good," said his uncle, jovially patting Lawrence on the back. "By all means, try the camera yourself if you wish. This model is too conspicuous to be useful to you, but it's fascinating to operate." Lawrence decided to humour his uncle and took up a position behind the tripod. He lined up a few practice shots using the V-shape on the leather to frame his Uncle Frederick and what would no doubt become his Aunt Connie. Once Lawrence was sure of his technique, he pulled the string and committed the moment to print. Turning a key on top of the box, Lawrence advanced the film as the germ of an idea formed in his head. Tuesday, April 30th, 1895. The hackney cab slowed to a halt outside Walton Jail. Lawrence emerged, carrying a tripod and a box containing the camera. He paid the bemused-looking cabman and walked towards the turreted jail. It was a handsome brick structure with stone dressings and round-headed windows, too grand to house the degenerate underbelly of Liverpool's criminal fraternity. Lawrence stopped for a moment to consider his options. There was no easy way to see William Miller, and subterfuge was his only choice. Even then, he would need to approach the deception with a bold disregard for the rules. Having racked his brain for a more simple option, Lawrence had ruled out everything else. All that remained was the course of action upon which he was about to embark. He would masquerade as a prison photographer. There were several reasons why he doubted the efficacy of this plan. Aside from the fact that there may already be a photographer, there was an equal chance of there never having been one. Some prisons routinely catalogued their offenders, but by no means all. Worse still, Lawrence might walk in to find an appointed photographer already at work in the jail. Either way, he would have to negotiate around this and any other problems that he might not have considered. It was essential to locate William Miller and find out how he had managed to conduct a burglary quite so unsuccessfully. Taking a deep breath, Lawrence walked towards the gate and past the low railings that surrounded the building. He strolled beyond the towers to a large wooden door and rang a brass bell conveniently placed to the side. Moments later, a square window opened, and the deep-voiced guard responded. "Yes." "I've come to photograph the prisoner Miller." "Which one?" "William Miller. He's not been here long." "I know the one," said the guard. "Shifty little weasel. But aren't they all? Wait a minute." Lawrence peered through the open hatch as the prison guard removed a sheet of carefully ruled paper from a clip on the wall. He lifted his glasses and squinted. "Nothing here," he said. "Didn't you come last week?" "Yes," said Lawrence gruffly. "This is a special request." "Who from?" "The Chief Constable to your governor," he said. "It's not on my list." "I can't help that. I've got my orders. Why don't you ask someone in authority?" Lawrence waited with bated breath, hoping that the guard did not have easy access to the prison warden. With a heavy camera and a cumbersome tripod, Lawrence was in no position to make a quick getaway should the need arise. "I can't," said the guard. "Just hand me the paperwork, will you?" Lawrence fished into his jacket for a note of authority from the police station, which he had forged earlier in the day. "Inspector Strettle," said the guard as he recognized the signature block. "Seems in order. I'll hang on to this." "As you wish," said Lawrence. The door swung open, and Lawrence passed through it and into an inner courtyard. The guard nodded to a pair of younger men who were playing cards on a trestle table outside the guardhouse. "One of you show him to D block." "I'll do it." The fair-haired warder tossed the cards onto the table and picked up a packet of woodbines and a box of matches. He led the way across the quadrangle in front of the entrance to the towered building dominating the prison complex. "This way," he said, turning left into a long corridor. They had almost reached the other end when he turned right at a double door and into a seating area beyond which was a barred door. "You can photograph him in there," said the guard, pointing to a large room on the left with a window facing into the courtyard. "I'll go and fetch him." Lawrence was too nervous to sit down and tried the door of the side room, hoping to see the view from the inner courtyard. The door would not budge, so he wandered towards a pinboard and read the few dog-eared notices. Lawrence raised an eyebrow at a flyer from the Primitive Methodists appealing for temperance, hoping they had aimed it at the guards. Traditionally, prisoners lacked access to alcohol, but who knew what might come about from the constant prison reforms? His musings were soon interrupted by the arrival of the fair-haired guard and a man of about 5'6", with a thick brown moustache and chains around his wrists, who accompanied him. At about 30 years old, William Miller was younger than Lawrence had anticipated. The guard stepped forward, unlocked the side room, and ushered Lawrence through. "Set up over there," he commanded before retreating to the next room where he stood quietly next to the prisoner. Lawrence opened the tripod and attached the camera, hoping that he looked authentic. The Kodak remained steady on the stand, which came as something of a relief. He raised a hand to the guard, who nodded before pushing the prisoner through the door. Then he selected a key from a large chain around his waist and unlocked the fetters. Miller rubbed his wrists and jerked his head while his eye twitched uncontrollably. "I'll be outside having a cigarette," said the warden, closing the door. Lawrence watched the guard loiter next to a low window running the length of the side room. He lit a cigarette and stared at Lawrence intently. Lawrence stood behind the camera, and as soon as it was clear that the guard was out of earshot, began to speak. "I've been to Red Cross Street," he said. "You left a mess." Miller stared at him, and the corner of his mouth began to twitch in time with his right eye. "People I know, influential people, think you may be innocent." Lawrence lied. "How would they know?" growled Miller. "Are you?" asked Lawrence, pulling the red cord on the Kodak. "What's it to you?" "There isn't much time," said Lawrence. "If you are innocent, I can help." "And if I'm not?" Lawrence pressed the button, which, in the hands of an expert, would produce an image. Nobody would see the finished article, so he only needed to look the part. The guard continued to smoke, and he assumed that the ruse was working. "Then I can't do very much. Now, what were you looking for?" "Where?" "In the attic of Red Cross Street." "How do you know?" Miller stepped backwards in surprise. "Never mind that. You missed every valuable item in the property. Nobody is that careless." "I've got nothing to say." "Fine. But have you got a good memory?" Miller nodded. "My name is Harpham. Lawrence Harpham. My offices are at the Butter Market in Bury St. Edmunds. I'm a private investigator, and I will try to help you." "I don't need your help," hissed Miller. The guard tossed his cigarette to the floor, stubbed it out, retrieved it, then dropped it in a waste bin. He glared at Lawrence suspiciously and entered the room. "Finished?" "All done," said Lawrence. The guard repositioned Miller and locked his shackles. "Oi, Jessup!" he bellowed to a man further down the corridor. "Show him out, will you?" he asked, pointing to Lawrence. Then, without another word, he unlocked the barred gate and marched Miller back to his cell. Minutes later, Lawrence emerged into the sunlight, wondering whether the experience had been worth it. He had gained no further information from Miller, and, had he been a cat, would be several lives lighter. It might have been worthwhile had Lawrence felt a strong leaning towards Miller's guilt or innocence. Instead, he was ambivalent. His instinct had deserted him. Lawrence hailed a cab conveniently parked down Hornby Road. He would return the camera to his uncle and board the next train to Bury. Chapter 16. Message from the Past. It was 7:15 in the evening when Lawrence finally opened the doors of 33 Butter Market. He settled at his desk feeling tired and irritable, recalling unpleasant memories of his train journey home. Lawrence had chosen an empty carriage and was reading a book when two innocent-looking children had invaded his space. At first he was untroubled and eyed them with benign amusement. But as the journey progressed, they started asking a series of increasingly inane questions, and his patience began to falter. He tolerated them until the younger boy started asking why cows slept standing up. Lawrence said he did not know. The boy tried again, and Lawrence gave the same answer. Finally, the boy dissolved in tears and kicked Lawrence on the leg. Lawrence scowled at the mother, waiting for her intervention, but her eyes remained shut. He spent the rest of the journey acting as an unpaid babysitter, glowering resentfully and convinced that she was feigning sleep. Lawrence had arrived in Bury after what seemed like an eternity. He deposited his luggage at home without bothering to unpack and proceeded to his office. It was clean and tidy as usual, and he was glad that he had listened to Violet when she insisted on employing a cleaner. Though initially reluctant, it had turned out to be a wise decision. Annie Hutchinson was hard-working and intelligent. Adept at dealing with general inquiries as well as cleaning, she was a safe pair of hands and more than capable of minding the office in their absence. But Lawrence suspected there was trouble ahead with the recent arrival of a young admirer, and his sister had introduced her to a young man, Robert Hicks. He had been hanging around far too often for Lawrence's liking. Not that he had anything against Robert, but because he lived in Norwich, he represented a threat. Lawrence had no wish for his reliable domestic to leave and settle elsewhere. The ever-efficient Annie had piled his post in the centre of the desk. 3 sealed letters rested on top of an open envelope, but only one of them held his interest. Lawrence had come to the office with the sole intention of locating the letter containing Catherine's crest. He'd asked Violet to destroy it, but knew very well that she wouldn't. Now that it was possible, he felt an overwhelming urge to procrastinate. He ignored the open envelope and turned to another, addressed in the familiar hand of his Uncle Max. It contained an invitation for a luncheon engagement, which Lawrence marked on the calendar. He filed the message in his bottom drawer, wondering why Uncle Max had chosen to post it to the office. Generally, mail found its way to his apartment unless it was business-related, but Uncle Max was getting on a bit. Perhaps it was a sign of things to come. Lawrence picked up the second envelope. It was brown and most likely contained a bill. Under normal circumstances, Lawrence would have put it straight on Violet's desk, unopened. But such was his need to postpone the inevitable that he opened it and read it, groaning aloud at the contents. The invoice was from the coal merchant who Lawrence should have paid 2 weeks ago. Violet had entrusted him with visiting the shop and settling the bill. He'd left with the best of intentions, but something had distracted him, though he could not remember what. In any case, Violet would be cross. He shoved the invoice into his jacket pocket, intending to settle it another day. Then Violet wouldn't need to know. Lawrence dealt with the third letter about a missing necklace, and the fourth about a poisoned guard dog by making appointments in his diary. He wasted even more time scribbling quick replies to each inquirer confirming his dates of attendance. Sighing, Lawrence rose and rested the letters against the carriage clock on the mantelpiece, ready for Annie to post tomorrow. Then he returned to his desk to confront the unavoidable. Any longer, and the problem would assume elephantine proportions. The cream-coloured envelope lurking on the desk was postmark-free and unstamped. Written at the top in capital letters was the word "Urgent," with the name and office address below. The rest of the envelope was unremarkable and contained no clues to the sender. Lawrence took a deep breath and removed the contents, keeping the picture face down, then steeled himself and turned it over. There it was. A perfect line and ink drawing of Catherine's crest, with Celtic crosses on a red stripe and blue dolphins on a silver background. He would recognize it anywhere. Penmanship was one of the quirks he'd loved about Catherine. She was proud of her heritage and a talented artist, regularly combining both through sketches of her coat of arms. This drawing was so close to her style that it could almost belong to her. Lawrence took a closer look. The similarity was uncanny. Who had sent it and why? Finding no other clues, Lawrence put his head in his hands and stared at the crest. He sat motionlessly for several minutes, then pushed his chair back and walked to the rear of the office. Unlatching the door, Lawrence approached the kitchen area shared with the milliner above and placed a pan on the gas stove. He watched the unlit hob for a few moments, his mind elsewhere. Then, shaking his head, he rummaged in the drawer for a packet of matches and struck one. Wearing a look of grim determination, Lawrence returned to the office. He discarded the crest and collected the envelope in which it had arrived. Lawrence paced the floor of the narrow kitchen, waiting for the pan to boil. Before long, the water began to bubble, and when he judged it ready, he took the envelope and held it over the boiling water. After a few moments, Lawrence removed the envelope and placed it on a low wooden cabinet. He waited, considering the futility of his actions and a plan doomed to failure. The uncanny resemblance of the crest with Catherine's drawing style had provoked memories. Memories of their courtship and time spent apart when they whiled away the hours by writing to each other. It had started when Lawrence was on duty in the Isle of Man. After 3 weeks of boredom and countless letters, he'd decided to write a secret message on the envelope flap. Catherine had found it and responded in kind, and this continued whenever he went away. They'd kept it up until motherhood stripped away the romance and much of Catherine's time. Lawrence picked at the envelope flap, not expecting to find anything. Catherine was dead and nobody else knew about their little game, yet he felt compelled to check. The steam had softened the envelope, and the flap pulled apart with ease. There, beneath the fold, written in dark blue ink, was the word deceiver. Lawrence dropped the envelope, recoiling in horror. He stumbled into his office, sat down heavily at his desk, and pulled the bottom drawer open. Grasping the bottle inside, Lawrence fumbled for a glass, slamming it carelessly onto the table. It split in half, and he hurled it to the floor, splintering shards across the office. His eyes darted from the crest to the envelope. Deceiver, deceiver, deceiver. Never, never, never. The walls felt like they were closing in on him, and the silence in the office was deafening. He took a slug of whiskey straight from the bottle and kept on drinking until darkness fell around him. Chapter 17. Distress. Wednesday, April 1st, 1895, 7:30 a.m. 2. Miss Violet Smith, Crown Hotel, Dis. From Miss Hutchinson, Buttermarket, Bury St. Edmunds. Come home quickly. Mr. Lawrence unwell, recovering at the residence of Mr. Farrow. Please do not delay. Chapter 18. Netherwood House. Wednesday, May 1st, 1895. Francis Farrow's residence in Westgate Street was an imposing 3-story building with an array of sash windows and a doorway set below a triglyph frieze. The Doric pilasters adorning the sides provided further grandeur, enhanced by a sizable driveway leading to garaging for his carriage and a small formal garden. Farrow's 3 decades as a high-ranking Suffolk detective had not generated quite enough income to buy such a magnificent property. As the eldest son, he had inherited the lion's share of his father's fortune, and this windfall allowed him to take early retirement and sole occupation of Netherwood House. Like his father before him, Francis lived alone except for the servants. His father had been a widower for over a decade, and Francis had never married. If his brother Michael had not chosen to follow his faith, he might have stayed in Bury with Francis. But Michael did not seem to envy his older brother's fortune, and had never expressed a wish to live at their ancestral home. Anne Huntingdon, their older sister, was the only other living member of the Farrow family, and she had joined her husband in India many years before. Anne only visited England occasionally, and Francis was left to enjoy the quiet luxury of his home alone. Violet had been to Netherwood on several previous occasions, and all were jolly affairs. She was therefore unaccustomed to the butterfly nerves that had settled inside her since catching the earlier train. It was almost 3:30 by the time she arrived, accompanied by Michael, who had insisted on joining her despite her protestations. She had already taken up too much of his time and was fearful that his superior would think he was neglecting his duties. But Michael had explained the situation, and the Reverend John had been sympathetic. As long as Michael was back in Friends before the weekend, he would manage. Michael rang the doorbell of his childhood home more out of politeness than necessity. Their old retainer, Albert Floss, answered it with a welcoming smile before asking after Michael's health. Once he was satisfied with the reply, he guided them into the drawing-room where Francis was sitting on a chaise longue. Beside him was a moustached man wearing a stethoscope around his neck. They stood as Violet entered the room. "Ah, good to see you both," said Francis. "You know Dr. Mallory, don't you?" Michael approached the doctor and shook his hand while Violet smiled uncertainly. Their paths had not crossed during her 4 years in Bury, and she was unaccountably nervous in his presence. "Where is Lawrence?" asked Michael. "Upstairs, in the blue room," said Francis. "What happened?" Violet picked anxiously at the brocade on her jacket as she spoke. "I'll let the doctor explain." "Sit down." Dr. Mallory beckoned them towards the sofa. "Mr. Harpham is suffering from nervous exhaustion. He has experienced a breakdown, not helped by the consumption of an excessive amount of alcohol. His spirits are low." "Poor Lawrence." Violet's eyes filled with tears. "His health has improved so much over the last few years that I thought he was over the worst of it. Why has he relapsed?" "It could be anything," said the doctor. "Sadly, it is all too common among the long-term injured. Mr. Farrow and I were discussing the possibility of moving Mr. Harpham to a sanatorium." "No." The word exploded from Violet's mouth. "He would hate that. He must recover in his own home." "I understand your feelings," said the doctor kindly, "but it is not always the case that home is best. Still, it is his choice, and if he refuses to go, I cannot make him unless he deteriorates further. But I have sedated him, and I strongly suggest that he is not left alone." "Then I will look after him. There is a spare room in my cottage. He can stay with me." "Or here," said Francis. "You can stay too if you like." "No," said Violet. "He will be better off with me." "How will it look?" asked Francis. "Your reputation will suffer." "I don't care. I will explain, and if people want to imply something that isn't true, then let them. Lawrence is my friend, and I know I can help." "Let her try," said Michael. "Violet has nursed him back to health once already." "His father will decide in the end," said Francis. "I contacted Lionel earlier, and he is already en route." "I am sure he will agree," said Violet confidently. "Thank you for taking care of Lawrence, but my background as a companion is perfect for looking after him. Caring for people is what I do best." Chapter 19. The Crown Hotel. Violet had cared for Lawrence well, very well, so well that he was sitting in the Crown Hotel in Dis only 2 weeks later waiting for her to join him. The first week after his breakdown had passed in a blur. Violet had fed him, cared for him, and tended to his every need while dutifully keeping the office running. When Violet was working, she sent Annie to her cottage to watch over him, and later in the evening she cheerfully cooked dinner and chatted about the day's events. Her presence was a balm to his wounded soul, and he felt, as before, immeasurable gratitude towards her. By the start of the second week, Lawrence was beginning to improve. He stopped taking the sedative prescribed by the doctor and started taking an interest in Violet's current case. 2 days later, she'd arrived home to find him sitting at the kitchen table surrounded by bits of paper and utensils. He had spread half the contents of her kitchen cupboard across the table at strategic intervals. "What are you doing?" she'd asked. "It makes no sense," said Lawrence, rearranging the crockery. "See, this is Moyes." He pointed to a pepper pot and moved it to the left of the table. "Needham is down here." He dragged a saucer towards him and pushed a china cup to his right. "And this is Miller," he said, pointing to the teacup. Finally, he grabbed a thimble and placed it above the pepper pot and saucer. "This thimble is the attic space. Now, they say that Miller attacked Moyes for money and no other reason. They were friends, and Moyes was kind to Miller. A purse of money was under Moyes's mattress, and Miller must have known that there was money in the house even if he didn't know the location. Regardless, the mattress is the first place you would look for money." "I agree," said Violet. "It is a pity that elderly people won't use banks. They often doubt that their money will be safe." "Precisely," said Lawrence. "And that's why they hide their most valuable items close to their person. It is inconceivable that Miller would have gone to look for money and not checked the mattress, especially as he had already killed the occupant of the bed." "What did Miller say to you?" asked Violet gently. She had avoided mentioning anything about Liverpool while Lawrence was recovering, but things had rapidly changed. The man before her was the usual version of Lawrence and not the sick and broken creature from the previous week. "Nothing," said Lawrence. "He neither confirmed nor denied it. But it's a question of logic. There was clear evidence that Miller was searching the attic. When I challenged him, he almost keeled over in shock. Now, Miller might have killed Moyes to prevent the old man from stopping his search, but if that was the case, then why attack Needham? He had already been into the loft before he hit the boy. Perhaps he was angry because he couldn't find what he was looking for." "I agree," said Lawrence, returning the cup to the saucer. "Whatever he was looking for and couldn't find was crucially important to him. The frustration of being unable to find it enraged him to the point of murder." "Do you think he was looking for money?" "No, I do not. Miller was searching for something connected to the Skoll confession." Violet frowned. "Are you sure?" "Of course not, but instinctively it fits. Tell me everything you discovered while I was in Liverpool." Violet chewed her lip, contemplating whether he was up to a long conversation, but Lawrence was adamant. He needed to know everything she did. They talked into the night. Violet recounted her experiences with Mr. and Mrs. Jackson over and over again until Lawrence was satisfied, and he finally decided that he had the measure of Moyes clear in his mind. "We'll go to Dis tomorrow," he had said, but Violet refused, and because she had been so good to him, he didn't press it. But as the days passed by and he fought to keep Catherine from his thoughts, he knew he must carry on with the case. Finding out more about Fanny Nunn and the Skoll confession became his one focus. At the end of the second week, he returned to his apartment, and after a lot of persuading, Violet agreed to return to Dis. Lawrence made arrangements with Annie Hutchinson to mind the office, and Violet left a day earlier. Friday, May 17th, 1895. Safely back in Dis, Lawrence had unpacked and was waiting for Violet, who had gone into the town for reasons best known to herself. "Another coffee, sir?" Minnie Panks had returned to the lounge with a vase of flowers and 2 newspapers. "Thank you," said Lawrence. "Help yourself if you like." She nodded towards the papers as she collected his empty cup. He picked up a paper and almost put it back when he realized it was local. The Dis Express was not likely to be a hotbed of exciting news. Lawrence half-heartedly read it, not expecting much in the way of national coverage, but he was wrong. Between an article on the Rickinghall Flower Show and a report about the Bishop of Norwich's views on education was an article headed, "The Liverpool Murder." Lawrence grasped the paper with both hands and read greedily. The trial of William Miller for the murder of Edward Moyes, formerly of Skoll, concluded at the Liverpool Assizes on Wednesday when the jury returned a verdict of guilty and the prisoner was sentenced to death. So that was the outcome. Miller would hang. Lawrence read on. All the details that he hadn't got from Tom Strettle or his uncle were in the newspaper report. Miller was poor and of bad character. He was an adulterer who had left his wife and children to run away to America with another woman who he subsequently robbed. His wife had forgiven him only to find him back home and covered in blood from the murder. She had burned his clothes and done her best to help him. Lawrence shook his head. Miller was guilty. Of that there could be no doubt. The only unknown was what he was trying to find. I don't suppose I will ever be sure, he muttered aloud. What was that? Lawrence had failed to notice the arrival of 3 men, who had squeezed past him on their way to a window seat. Sorry, said Lawrence. I was talking to myself. I do it all the time, said one of the men. I find I get a much more civilized response. One of the other men raised his eyes heavenwards and shook his head. Here you are, said Minnie Panks, bustling into the lounge and placing a cup of coffee on the table. Any sign of Violet yet? Asked Lawrence, hopefully. Minnie shook her head. Not yet. Are you looking for Violet Smith? Asked the slimmer man. Why, yes, do you know her? We had the pleasure of meeting Violet a few weeks ago, he continued, walking towards Lawrence. He offered his hand. Harry Aldrich, he said, and this is Joseph Pope and Robert Moore. We ran into Violet half an hour ago. She was on her way to the church. Thank you. I'm Lawrence Harpham. Violet and I will be staying here for a few days. Do you mind if we join you? Asked Joseph Pope, already moving towards him with a cup in his hand. Not at all, please sit down, said Lawrence with more enthusiasm than he felt. Conversing with strangers this early in the morning had not been part of his plan. He folded the paper and put it to one side. How do you know Violet? He asked. We met at the last lodge meeting. Harry Aldrich reached into his pocket for a pair of spectacles, picked up the paper and scrutinized the page. Catching up with the cricket results, I see, he continued. Yes, it sounds like a good match, said Lawrence vaguely. He had no idea who had been playing or the outcome of the game, but it was easier than admitting to reading a report of the Liverpool slaying. They're a good team over at Thelneatham, said Moore, looking at the paper over Harry's shoulder. I beg to differ, said Joseph. We won by more than an innings last time we met. He reeled off a long list of local cricketing statistics. How the devil do you remember all that information? Asked Aldrich. He's probably making it up. Robert Moore rested his chin on his hands and stared across the table. Joseph Pope raised an eyebrow. His round face bore a quizzical expression. Check them if you like, said Harry Aldrich. I guarantee he will be right. He can't remember how to tie a shoelace, but remembers all the non-essential details. You enjoy cricket, then? Asked Lawrence. Not really, Pope replied. It's a dull game. I don't play myself, but collecting scores, well, that's a different matter. That's what happens when you work in a bank. Robert Moore looked apologetically towards Lawrence. He spends too much time adding numbers together. It has addled his brain. You work in Dis? Lawrence was struggling for small talk in a group of 3 men who were evidently well acquainted. He was very much the outsider. The National Provincial Bank on Mere Street, said Joseph, looking at his pocket watch, which is where I should be now. He rose and tipped his forelock before leaving the room. Don't mind him, said Harry Aldrich. He's one of the more eccentric members of our lodge. Are you Freemasons? Asked Lawrence, feeling on more solid territory at the mention of lodges. Oddfellows, said Aldrich. We met your friend at the last lodge meeting. You did, said Robert Moore. I was elsewhere at the Faith and Fidelity Lodge trying to boost their spirits. I play the accordion. He continued by way of explanation. And he plays it jolly well, said Harry. Was there a problem at the lodge? Asked Lawrence, wondering why spirits were low. Aldrich flashed Moore a look, but he ignored it. The treasurer ran off with the bulk of their funds, he said frankly. It's gone to court, and they secured a conviction, but it's too late. Their savings are gone, all that money fraudulently used. Shocking, said Lawrence. What a shame. They've appointed another treasurer, Moore continued, but there's little money left to look after. The irony of a fraud case in the Faith and Fidelity Lodge was not lost on Lawrence, but he kept his counsel and made no comment. "We're arranging a series of events to raise funds for our brothers," said Harry Aldrich. "A spring fair on Sunday week. You're welcome to come along." "I expect we will be back in Bury by then," said Lawrence. "We're only here for a day or two." "Work or pleasure?" asked Robert Moore. Lawrence opened his mouth to answer just as Violet walked past the doorway. "Violet!" Lawrence called to her, but she sailed by. "Excuse me." He put down his coffee cup and followed her into the hall. I say, Violet!" She turned to face him. "Lawrence." She smiled at the sight of his face. "Where have you been?" "To the church and the chemist. I'm feeling a little under the weather this morning." "Go back to bed, then. I can carry on alone." "It is nothing serious," she said. "Where shall we start?" "I've been chatting to your new friends," said Lawrence. "We ought to say goodbye before we leave." He returned to the lounge with Violet in tow. Harry Aldrich rose and greeted her. "Did you find the vicar?" he asked. "Yes, I did, thank you. He was very accommodating, even though I unintentionally interrupted his meeting with Mr. Garrard." "Henry Garrard?" Robert lowered the newspaper and scratched his nose. "Yes, I believe so." "Solicitor and county coroner," said Harry helpfully. "I wonder what he was doing there. Any reason why he shouldn't be?" Harry peered over his glasses. "The last time I saw the two of them together they had words," said Robert. "About what?" "I couldn't hear what they were saying, despite the raised voices." "Unusual," said Harry. "They are both mild-mannered men." Lawrence coughed and nodded imperceptibly towards Violet. "We must go now," she said. "It was good to meet you again." She offered her hand first to Harry Aldrich and then to Robert Moore, before leaving the room ahead of Lawrence. "Let's walk," said Lawrence, following Violet into the hallway. "We won't get any privacy in here." They proceeded down St. Nicholas Street towards St. Mary's Church. "How did you get on?" he asked. "The Reverend Manning is charming," said Violet. "We got on rather well, once I'd apologized for interrupting him." "Could he help?" "Yes and no," said Violet. "He showed me the burial register, and there was just enough time to copy down a few names of women who were the right age and recently deceased. He has allowed me free access to the register whenever I like." "Good." Lawrence nodded approvingly. "I told him that I was looking into the death of someone who lived in Dis, but did not give any further detail. I thought it would be unwise to say too much, even to a man of the cloth." "Always best," murmured Lawrence. "But then he asked if she died in Dis, and of course we don't know." "No, we don't." Lawrence squinted and shielded his eyes as the bright sun penetrated the marketplace. "The Bible came from Dis, and the address book directed us to Jackson in Scole. She could have died in either place. Or somewhere else altogether." "Agreed. The burial records won't get us anywhere. We need to try another way." They turned into Mere Street and walked past the National Provincial Bank on the right. "I wonder if Mr. Pope was late." "He doesn't strike me as the type to care one way or another," said Violet. "He is quite an unusual man." "I didn't meet him long enough to form a judgment. Anyway, that only leaves us with Fanny Nunn," said Lawrence. "Did you ask about her?" Violet nodded. "The Reverend confirmed that she drowned, but I couldn't get him to tell me any more than that. Nobody wants to talk about it. Odd when it happened such a long time ago." "A wasted visit, then?" "No. Fanny's mother still lives in Dis. She is the proprietor of the Two Brewers Inn." "Capital. She will know everything of note." "If she will speak to us." "Perhaps you could go and ask her. She is more likely to talk to you than me." "And if she doesn't, her daughter might. Her daughter's name is Carrie Alger. She's a little younger than Fanny and resides with her mother at the inn." "Good. And you will speak to them?" "I'll try." "Are you sure you won't come?" "No," said Lawrence. "This Henry Garrard fellow that you met earlier, the county coroner, you say?" "I didn't say that. I barely know him." "It doesn't matter," said Lawrence. "I'm going to visit regardless. Any coroner worth his salt will have full records about a local drowning. He might be able to assist with the recent female deaths, too." "As you wish." Violet smiled at Lawrence. Though not fully recovered, he had regained that glint in his eye with which she was all too familiar. She had her doubts about their investigation. There was little basis for it, and no hope of a financial reward. But if anything could keep his mind off Catherine, it was an unusual case, and for once she was happy to indulge him. Chapter 20. The Two Brewers Inn. Not one to waste time in contemplation, Violet elected to visit the Two Brewers Inn in St. Nicholas Street without delay. She waited outside while Lawrence called into the National Provincial Bank to ask for directions to Henry Garrett's offices. He returned 5 minutes later, and they parted in the marketplace. Violet went north, and Lawrence made his way past St. Mary's Church and into Mount Street. It was a short walk to the Two Brewers Inn, which allowed Violet the opportunity to call into the Corn Hall. She crossed through the covered portico and through the foyer, where she stopped in front of a printed poster. It advertised a second showing of the Disk Choral Society's rendition of Handel's operetta, Acis and Galatea. She smiled, pleased at her excellent recollection. She had glimpsed an advertisement in the paper earlier that day, but hadn't been sure of the date of the performance. It was as she'd hoped. If they were still in Dis tomorrow, the operetta would be an excellent way to spend their leisure time, if she could persuade Lawrence to come. If not, she would go alone. The Two Brewers Inn stood next door to the Corn Hall. It was a 2-story timber-framed building with a coachway and more modest than its ostentatious neighbour. It was early afternoon by the time Violet peered through the front window. The inn was full, and for a moment she balked at entering alone, but steadied her nerves and walked through the front door. As she passed through the crowd, she tried to think of a reason to bring up the sensitive subject of the publican's daughter's death. On the way to the counter, Violet noticed a discarded newspaper on a wooden chair. It provoked immediate inspiration for a ruse that might be effective if handled well. Gaining confidence, she approached the young woman behind the counter who was busy serving drinks and waited for her to finish. The girl poured 2 tankards of ale from a large jug which she placed on the bar before holding her hand out for money. An elderly man paid at a snail's pace, then grasped the tankards with shaking hands and walked an unsteady path to a table by the window. The air in the public house was musty with the smell of hops and none too clean. Violet leaned on the sticky counter and immediately pulled her hand away, wiping it discreetly on her skirts. Her heart sank as she looked at the floor. A combination of dust and spilt ale had already leached over the bottom of her dress. "Yes?" The girl's accent carried a familiar North Norfolk burr. "Is Mrs. Nunn available?" asked Violet. "Who wants to know?" "Miss Violet Smith." "Is she expecting you?" "No," said Violet. "Then she's busy. She has asked me not to disturb her unless the coal merchant calls." Violet bit her lip. "Well, can you give her a message?" she asked, crossing her fingers behind her back. "Tell her that I'm a journalist. I'm currently engaged in writing an article on selected East Anglian public houses, and would be grateful if she would grant me an interview. Please say that she is free to decline, but to keep my visit secret. The Two Brewers is our first choice, but other inns in the town are under consideration. If she would rather not feature in the magazine, we will select another establishment instead." The girl raised her eyebrows in surprise. "I'll be back in a moment," she said, and left Violet alone in the busy bar. Violet stood near the counter trying to look unobtrusive and thanking her lucky stars that she'd recently read an article by journalist Eliza Lynn Linton. Although Violet disagreed with Mrs. Linton's views on feminism, she admired her forthright opinions. Though Violet always regretted lying, she'd seen no other way to proceed without doing so. There had been a reluctance to discuss Fanny Nunn's death so far, and a direct approach would not work. Pretending to be a journalist might. She stared towards the window and waited for the barmaid to return, knowing that the first thing she would need to do is pour another pint. The poor old man had managed to carry the beers as far as the table, but within moments of arriving had knocked one onto the floor. His companions stared dolefully at the growing puddle, but neither man made any attempt to clean the mess. "This way." The girl had returned and was beckoning Violet to follow her towards the rear of the inn. "Up there, turn left at the top," she said curtly. Violet wondered at the wisdom of employing a girl of so few words in a public house where exchanging pleasantries was key. But it was not her problem. Obtaining information was her only concern. She made her way up the creaking stairs, trying not to touch the grey film on the white wooden railing. At the top of the stairs, she opened the door to a room which served as a parlour. A plump woman with auburn-coloured hair tinged with a smattering of grey was sitting in front of an unlit fire. She lounged in a reclining chair with her feet on top of an upturned basket, and she'd pulled up her black dress to expose unstockinged feet. Her ankles were red and swollen. She looked over her shoulder. "Come in, Miss Smith," she said. "Excuse my state of dress. Doctor's orders. Now, take a seat over there." She gestured towards a padded armchair covered with an old shawl. "And tell me all about it." Violet reached into her bag and pulled out the notebook and pencil she habitually carried. "I'm a journalist," she said. "As I explained to your barmaid, I have been commissioned to produce an article on selected public houses in Norfolk and Suffolk." "So I understand," said Mrs. Nunn, scratching her calf. White tracks scored her legs and did not fade. Violet averted her eyes, feeling slightly uncomfortable. "How did you select the 2 brewers in?" asked Mary. Violet had already considered the question while she was waiting at the bar. "I didn't select it," she said. "Neither did my editor. One of your customers put it forward." "Well, I'll be," said Mary Nunn. A smile spread across her face and her blue eyes twinkled. She tucked a lock of hair into her lace cap before continuing. "I'm not altogether surprised," she said. "There are no airs and graces in my establishment, not like others I could mention. People are free to say what they will and come and go as they please." "What publication do you represent?" "The Wyndham Courant," Violet replied, hoping she sounded convincing. "Now, tell me, what hours do you keep?" she continued. Mary Nunn responded, counting on her fingers as she spoke, and Violet scribbled a series of unreadable notes across her book. "Who works with you?" "My daughter Carrie and my servant Maria both live and work here," Mary Nunn replied. "The barmaid, Susan, who showed you upstairs, and another girl, Beatrice, live out with family but come in daily to work behind the bar. Thomas Clark is the barrel man and helps with any heavy work. I'm a widow, you see." "I'm sorry," said Violet sympathetically. "Yes, 2 times over," continued Mary Nunn, staring into the distance with misty eyes. "Henry Merton and Henry Nunn. I outlived both of 'em." "How sad." Violet leaned over and touched Mary's hand. The older woman's eyes filled with tears at the small gesture of kindness. "And my poor children," she continued, "Ellen and Fanny. Both girls died young." Violet stopped writing and looked up with interest. "It's one thing losing your husband, but losing a child, that is a tragedy for a parent to endure." "It was," Mary agreed. "Ellen died naturally, but poor Fanny, I still do not know to this day whether she did away with herself or whether somebody killed her." Violet gasped and put a hand to her chest, surprised at the sudden offering of information. "You poor thing." Mary hoisted herself upright and leaned forwards, looking directly into Violet's eyes. "I fear I was too hard on her," she said. "I drove her to it, one way or another." "What do you mean?" "She drowned in the mere," said Mary. "They called it murder at the trial, but I am not so sure. I wanted her to go to Norwich to take a situation. You see, I had younger children at home to care for, and I thought it would be good for Fanny to make her way in life, but she didn't want to leave. Her sweetheart lived here in Dis. Young Alfred Wiley." Mary's eyes filled with tears again. If I had not sent her away, she might still be alive. I am sure that is not the case. Violet felt a surge of empathy for the aging woman who had buried 2 daughters. She was unhappy about leaving, said Mary, and she told me that she would not trouble me long. What do you think she meant by that? I would not have thought anything of it if she had only said it once, but she mentioned it several times. I won't trouble anyone long. That is what she uttered. But that is not the same as threatening suicide, said Violet. Mary Nunn shuddered at Violet's words. I know it is not germane to my article, said Violet, taking a chance, but I would be glad to hear what happened that day. You might feel better talking about it. Mary nodded. It has been a long time since I have spoken of Fanny. Carrie does not like to remember her sister's death. Nobody talks about Fanny any more. The trial divided the town. How? Half the people thought she had made away with herself, and the other half agreed with the jury. In the end, most people came around to thinking that she was responsible for her death. I can see why they might, said Violet. After all, the alternative would mean a murderer in their midst. What do you believe? I don't know. But I fear it was a suicide, and that means I must bear some responsibility. But worse still is the possibility that somebody killed my poor girl. Did she have any enemies? No. Mary shook her head. She helped me in the inn and was always chatty, always interested in people. She enjoyed a drink, loved to talk, and naturally became a great favourite among our customers. What happened on the day that she died? Asked Violet gently. Mary let out a deep sigh and sank back into her chair. I last saw her alive on the 29th of November, 1877. It was a Thursday, and a little after 11 o'clock at night. Chapter 21. The Mere. It's a day I will never forget, said Mary Nunn sadly. My last ever sighting of Fanny was in the passageway at the rear of the inn. The Dailies had left, and we were all set to turn in. It had been a long night, and the inn had been full due to a celebration. One of the young men had secured a position in London and prepared himself to leave the next day, just like Fanny. His friends were drunk and quite rowdy, but they left at 11 o'clock, and we closed the doors. Was Fanny alone? She was then, but her sweetheart, Alfred, had been with her for most of the evening. What was she doing in the passageway? Nothing. She seemed to be waiting. I said to her, Fanny dear, take the light. It's time to go to bed. And I handed her the oil lamp. She took it without a word, and I suppose she went upstairs. I did not follow, as I had to check the doors and windows downstairs. Did you always secure the inn? Not always, said Mary. But some money had gone missing the previous week. Not a lot. But I did not know how or when it disappeared, so I was more careful than usual. Did she bid you good night later on? She may have, but if she did I never noticed, as I was still locking up. And she had been out of sorts, you said. She had been low-spirited all week. I could not make out what the matter was. I knew that she was unhappy about leaving, and would not have gone by choice, but it was more than that. She had left home before, you see. I'd secured her an unpaid position in North Walsham as a favour for a friend to get her used to the idea of working away. She had not been unhappy there. Quite the contrary. Violet turned a page in her notebook, having covered 2 sides with her small, compact writing. She glanced at Mary Nunn, wondering how she felt about seeing her take notes. If she had an objection, she did not voice it. Was Fanny ready to leave for her new position? Not really. She was due to journey to Norwich and should have gone on Wednesday, but she didn't start making preparations to pack until Thursday, the day she died. I'd put the trunk in her bedroom and said, why don't you get on packing your box? Fanny seemed worried and said that she was in no hurry and that she didn't want to pack more than was necessary. I told her that she could take as much or as little as she needed because she could come home on Sunday morning and spend the day here. Then she could take away extra clothes if she wanted. Did she intend to live with her new employer? No. Mary rubbed her hands together, as if trying to improve the circulation. She was going to stay in Bedford Street with my married daughter Ellen Hammond, her stepsister. So you went to bed once you had locked up? Not straight away. I sat up for a while. But you didn't hear her come downstairs? No. I had no idea that Fanny was out. Violet lowered her notebook and leaned forward. I know this will be difficult, but can you tell me how you came to find out that your daughter was dead? Mary sighed deeply. For a moment, she seemed reluctant to continue, and Violet wondered if she had pushed her too far. She sat quietly, hardly breathing, and hoped that Mary would speak. It was about 7 o'clock on Friday morning. I'd been awake since dawn and was tidying and preparing for the day. The busman came in to collect Fanny and take her to Norwich, and I went up to her room. Was she usually late up? Yes, often. Fanny was in the habit of taking a little too much drink at times and was not an early riser. Did she sleep alone? Yes, Fanny had a room of her own. I went upstairs to wake her as soon as the busman arrived, but she had not slept in her bed. The bedclothes were undisturbed and her trunk was lying open on the floor. Had she packed anything? Mary's brow knitted in concentration. Yes, she said. Now I come to think of it, her trunk was fully packed. Not just the bits I had put in, but most of her clothes and all of her shoes. So she intended to leave. I've never been sure, said Mary. In recent years I have veered more towards the suggestion that she did away with herself, but today is the first time that I have thought about the trunk. Would she have bothered with it if she had intended to throw herself into the mere? What did you do when you saw that her room was empty? I went back down to tell the busman, John Rudd. When I said that Fanny was not in her room, he asked me if I had seen Mr. Wood that morning. I said I had not been outside yet and had not spoken to anyone. Then you won't have heard the news, he said. News about Fanny. News about a young woman jumping into the mere. I knew at once, as soon as he said it, that it must be Fanny. She was not in her room and a girl was lying dead in the water. Of course it must be my daughter. My servant at the time was Elizabeth Peake. I sent her over to Inspector Amos to ask for his help. He came straight back to the inn, but it wasn't until midday that they retrieved her poor body. How dreadful. The account almost moved Violet to tears. Why did they think that she might have met her end by foul play? She asked. Though it grieves me to say so, your story suggests that Fanny either jumped or fell into the mere. There were many witnesses who thought otherwise, said Mary Nunn. Upstanding professional people. John Aldrich, his son Henry and daughters Louisa and Alice, and John and Sarah Wood of the Sun Inn. There is no reason for them to lie. No, none at all, agreed Violet. It must have been a dreadful time for you. I was in bed for several days, said Mary. I could not move or function with the pain of it. I sent my son Christopher to Norwich to fetch Ellen, my eldest daughter. She kept the inn until I was well enough to work again and took care of the funeral with the burial club money. But a week later, I was ordered to give evidence at the inquest. And you were not yet recovered. My body was weak and my mind weaker still. The coroner asked many questions of me as if I was a prisoner on the stand. You should have had more time to mend, said Violet. Mary nodded. You should write about that. She said there was no sympathy for me, yet I had done nothing wrong. Did you say that the jury found Fanny's death felonious? Yes. They said she'd been killed. The verdict was murder by person or persons unknown. But they never found her killer. They never looked. It was only the jury that believed in a murder, and the Aldriches, who said they heard her cries for help. Within a few months they'd forgotten Fanny as if she had never existed. As I told you, most people thought she had taken her own life, and, like them, I did not see any purpose in an investigation for its own sake. And now? And now, I wonder whether I should have done more to find out. Could a killer have lived among us these last 20 years? Chapter 22. A Revelation. Henry Garrett's office formed a large part of a terraced house in Mount Street, a short distance away from the National and Provincial Bank. Lawrence had asked the clerk for directions and was in luck. Mr. Garrett had conducted his banking earlier that day and had mentioned his intent to return to his office. Sure enough, Lawrence pushed the door open to find a young clerk writing in a ledger with studious concentration. The young man looked up as Lawrence entered and placed his pen in the inkstand. "May I help?" he asked in a faltering voice that sounded as if it hadn't quite broken. "Is Mr. Garrett available?" asked Lawrence. "I'll check," said the clerk, rising to his feet. He was short, a full head shorter than Lawrence, with fine, wispy blonde hairs covering the lower half of his face. "Who will I say is calling?" he asked. "Lawrence Harpham." He hesitated as if about to ask a further question, then changed his mind. Lawrence watched as the boy walked timidly towards a wooden door at the end of the room and knocked twice. "Yes!" A gruff voice came from the room beyond. "Mr. Harpham to see you, sir," said the young clerk. "What does he want?" "I don't know," said the clerk, biting his lip. The sigh from the other room was loud enough for Lawrence to hear. There was a short silence, then the door swung open to reveal a stout, grey-haired man of between 60 and 70 years. He was sporting a handlebar moustache. "Pleased to meet you, Mr. Harpham," he said, extending his hand. "This way." He gestured to the door through which he had come. "Take a seat and I will be with you shortly." Lawrence made himself comfortable in one of a pair of chairs at the front of a sturdy oak desk. A bookcase stacked with law books filled the right-hand side of the back wall, while a tall bureau stood to the left of the fireplace. The side window overlooked a pretty cottage garden with tall yellow foxgloves swaying against the glass in the light May breeze. Lawrence tried not to listen to the raised voice coming from the other room. The young clerk was getting a dressing down for some failing in his service. Mr. Garrett returned and pushed the door a little too firmly. It slammed against the frame, making Lawrence jump. "Sorry about that," he said as he sat behind the desk. He leaned forward on his elbows and steepled his hands. "He's only been with me a month," he continued. "Good at his numbers and letters, but short on common sense. I'm not at all sure that he will cut the mustard." "Good men are hard to find," muttered Lawrence vaguely. "Indeed they are. Anyway, Mr. Harpham, we've met before, haven't we?" "Not as far as I know," said Lawrence. "You sure? There's something familiar about you." Lawrence shook his head. "I think I would have remembered." "Never mind. Must be imagining it. Perhaps I should retire after all. Ellen is always saying that I should step back and leave things to my business partner, but I cannot agree. When a man stops working, he stops thinking. My friends all seem to die when they give up their occupation. Now, what can I do for you?" "I hoped for some information. Am I correct in thinking that you are a coroner?" "I am coroner for the liberties of the Duke of Norfolk." "And you carry out inquests?" "I do." "Would you have conducted an inquest in Dis in 1877? "No. That would have been Mr. Cully." "Ah. How may I contact him?" "That won't be possible without a medium. Cully died a long time ago. What is it you would like to know?" "A young woman, Fanny Nunn, died in 1877. I wondered if you could tell me a little more about the inquest." "It was nothing to do with me. A different jurisdiction, you see. Cully was deputy coroner for Norfolk." "That's a shame." "Not necessarily. I take it upon myself to collect copies of all inquests and autopsies relevant to Dis and the surrounding areas. It makes my work much easier." "Then you have records for all suspicious deaths?" "Yes, in theory. But whether a death is suspicious is a subjective matter." "Meaning?" "Well, a coroner is only notified if the policeman in attendance deems it necessary. Suspicion must exist in the first place." Are you saying the opinion of one man alone precipitates a coroner's investigation? Yes. That is often the case. So any flaw in logic or laziness on the part of the policeman concerned could prevent the reporting of a questionable death. In principle, but there is no reason for a man of the law to disregard such a crime. And it did not happen in the case of Fanny Nunn. There was an inquest. From what you say, there would have been. I have an hour before my next appointment. I can check my records if it helps. Thank you. Lawrence nodded appreciatively and waited while the solicitor opened the glass doors of the bookcase. He extracted a sizable, hard-backed register which he placed on the desk, and within moments had located the relevant record. He turned the register to face Lawrence and pointed to an entry. "That's it," he said. "You can read it while I take this document to young Mr. Jones." Henry Garrard left the room while Lawrence read the report. Mr. Cully had presided over the well-attended inquest, and Mr. John Aldrich was foreman of the jury. A dozen or so witnesses gave statements, all reputable members of Dis Society. 2 surgeons conducted the post-mortem, and neither found any marks of violence. Fanny Nunn was not pregnant at the time of her death, and the cause of death was suffocation by drowning. The coroner directed the jury to establish why the deceased was in the water. Was she there by her own hands, or due to the actions of another? Evidence indicated that the deceased might have been of unsound mind at the time of her death, and there were discrepancies between the testimony of Alfred Wiley and that of Inspector Amis. The coroner allowed the jury to return a verdict of found drowned, if they had any doubt, but the jury was not so minded. After about an hour's deliberation, the public returned to hear a verdict of willful murder by person or persons unknown. Lawrence closed the register and pondered. The conclusion was a surprise. The coroner had given a clear steer towards suicide or an open verdict, which had not swayed the jury. Either they were mistaken or had heard something that concerned them. Henry Garrard interrupted his thoughts as he returned to his office. "How did you get on?" he asked. "I'm not sure," said Lawrence. "This account has raised as many questions as it has answered. I'm sorry that I could not have been more helpful. You're not local to Dis, are you?" "No," said Lawrence. "I'm here on business. I'll be returning to Bury in a few days. Thank you for your help anyway." He stood and held his hand out to the solicitor. Henry Garrard clicked his fingers. "That's how I know you!" he exclaimed. "Oh." His face clouded as a further thought crossed his mind. "It's a delicate matter." "What is? How do we know each other?" Garrard sighed, seemingly regretting his recollection. He gestured to Lawrence to sit down. "We have never met," he said. "I don't know you, but I know your name. I am sorry that you lost your wife in such tragic circumstances." Lawrence slumped in the chair, dazed at the unexpected reference to Catherine. "You conducted her inquest?" Henry Garrard nodded his head. "I would not typically have done so, but from time to time we cover other jurisdictions. It just so happens that I was available that night." "I have never seen a report of Catherine's autopsy," said Lawrence. "I was unwell and in no mood to attend the inquest." "That's probably for the best. Facts cannot undo the tragedy or lessen the sorrow." "Yet I owe her a responsibility. I should have gone." "You know how she met her end. Isn't that enough?" "She died in a fire. She must have suffered terribly." Henry Garrard turned to the cabinet once again. This time he selected a different volume with red binding and gold letters down the spine. He licked his fingers and turned the pages. "Mr. Harpham, on that fact at least I can reassure you. Your wife died of smoke inhalation. It is most unlikely that she suffered at all." Lawrence expelled a deep breath. "Thank God," he said. "The thought of her last moments have haunted me for years. And my daughter, Lily?" "The same. Lily was in her bed, and there was no evidence that she ever woke. Lawrence's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you," he said. "I cannot tell you how much that helps." He managed a weak smile. "At least it must have been a quick inquest," he continued. Henry Garrard nodded. "Yes. Once they discounted the arson theory, proceedings were straightforward. As you know, the verdict was an accidental death." "Arson theory?" Lawrence pushed the chair away and walked to the window with his hands over his mouth. "Arson? Nobody has ever mentioned the possibility that the fire was deliberate." Henry Garrard scanned the report. "As I said, the theory was raised and discarded. Arson was mentioned only in passing at the inquest." "I never knew." "It is a hard thing for a man who has lost his family to hear, and unnecessary, it would appear." "But I was in the police force. They had an obligation to tell me." Henry Garrard raised his eyebrows. "I expect your colleagues were trying to spare your feelings," he said. "Even so—" The words trailed away as Lawrence fought to regain his composure. "Mr. Garrard, thank you for your help. Forgive my reaction. I am truly grateful." He reached out for Garrard's hand and returned to the Crown so deep in thought that he remembered nothing of the journey. Lawrence located Violet in the sitting room of the Crown Hotel. She was occupying a seat by the window and frowning in deep concentration as she studied the contents of her notebook. He slid into the opposite seat, and she looked up. "At last! I expected you back hours ago." "I went for a walk around the mere." "You should have come with me. Mary Nunn was very helpful. I feel as if I know Fanny much better now." "Good," Lawrence murmured noncommittally. "Only the jury believed it was murder. Everyone else thought the poor girl killed herself. It is only now that Mary Nunn is beginning to wonder." "I know. I read the inquest report," said Lawrence. "The coroner directed the jury to return an open verdict or one of drowning while of unsound mind." "Yet they didn't. There must be a reason. Are you listening?" "Sorry." Lawrence was staring into the distance, lost in thought. "Well?" Lawrence regarded Violet impatiently. "The foreman was a Mr. John Aldrich," he said, "and the main witnesses all carried the Aldrich surname. Assuming they were members of the same family, it is hardly surprising that their similar stories influenced the jury. Be that as it may, I do not think there is anything sinister in it." "That's a sudden change of opinion on your part." Lawrence sighed. "The whole case is ridiculous. I've created a mystery where there is none. We are wasting our time. I'm surprised you have gone along with it." Violet closed her notebook. "I thought it was what you wanted," she said, studying his face. "You're my equal partner," said Lawrence coldly. "If you think a case is not worth pursuing, you should say so." "What's wrong, Lawrence?" "Nothing." "Yes, there is. Why must something always be wrong if we don't agree?" "I know you better than that. Something has happened, and I don't think it has anything to do with the Aldriches." Lawrence put his head in his hands. "I don't want to talk about it." "But you will," said Violet, "and when you do, come and find me. I will be in my room." She gathered her notebook and papers and stood up. "Violet." Lawrence looked at her helplessly. She sat down again and reached for his hand. "What is it?" "Catherine," he said. "Henry Garrard told me that he performed her autopsy. I never knew. And there's something else. The police considered the possibility of arson for a while." Violet sat quietly, listening without interruption. "Poor Lawrence," she said when he had finished. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know," he said, shaking his head. "I cannot seem to free myself from the past. Every time I accept Catherine's death, something comes along and knocks me off track." "The best way to carry on is to embrace the present," said Violet. "How?" "By dealing with the task at hand." "Our positions on the Skoll case have altered," she said. "You have come to think of it as a waste of our time, but I do not. It is only a small thing, But Fanny packed her trunk to go. Why would she have bothered if she intended to do away with herself? And we have met Harry Aldrich. He is a reasonable man, a successful auctioneer, and well regarded around the town. Let us give full attention to this matter. Forget the past for a while. I cannot. Violet squeezed his hand. Yes, you can. You must. What do you suggest? Let's move forward with our investigation. I will speak to Alfred Wiley. He was Fanny Nunn's sweetheart. I have already checked with Minnie Panks, and Wiley still lives in Dis. While I'm doing that, you can visit Inspector Amos. He was in charge of the investigation but is now retired. He left Dis, but I have it on good authority that he resides in Attleborough. As you were both in the police force at the same time, he is bound to speak to you. I've met him once or twice, said Lawrence. I do not know him well, but you are right. He is a decent chap and will no doubt cooperate. So that is settled? No. Forgive me, Violet, but I must go back to Bury first. Why? To see William Clark. Who? Superintendent William Clark. Can he help? Not with this. I used to work for Clark. If they considered arson, he would have known, and it would have been his decision to keep it from me. Violet was still holding his hand. Is that wise? She asked with a gentle squeeze. Probably not, but I need to know. You are picking at a scab that will never heal. I cannot let things lie as they are, Violet. I have known for years that something was amiss. I have felt it and deliberately ignored it. If I am ever going to be free, then I must confront what happened. Do you understand what I mean? Violet nodded without speaking. I will go to Bury, and then I will go to Attleborough, I promise. Will you come with me? No. You must go alone. I will track down Alfred Wiley. Get Michael to help. He is too busy, Lawrence. Michael has responsibilities of his own. I will manage it alone. Again, said Lawrence. I am sorry. Don't say it. Violet left the Crown and walked to the church. By the time she returned, Lawrence had gone. Chapter 23. In Pursuit of William Clark. Saturday, May 18th, 1895, 5:30 a.m. Have you any idea what time it is? Francis Farrow thundered down the stairs, clad in a dressing gown. His butler, Albert Floss, followed meekly behind. Yes, thank you, said Lawrence, advancing towards him. My pocket watch is functioning perfectly well today. Did you know that it could have been arson? What are you talking about? Catherine, of course. How many other people do you know who died in a house fire? Ah, no need to be rude, Lawrence. Come and sit down. Albert, fetch some coffee, please. He guided Lawrence into the breakfast room. Now, sit down and tell me all about it. No, you tell me. You must have known. Well, I didn't. Don't forget, I was stationed in Ipswich when Catherine died. You must have heard something. Francis sighed. There was the merest suggestion that her death might not be accidental. I don't know why. They quashed the idea almost immediately, and nothing further came of it. And you didn't think to mention it to me? Of course not. You were in no condition. Then I'll go and see what Superintendent Clark has to say. No, you won't. Not today, at any rate. Why? Has he been posted away? No, he's still in Bury, but it's Saturday, and we're hosting the Quatuor Coronati Lodge for luncheon. Then take me as your guest. Certainly not. Why? Because I hold a senior position in the lodge, and you will cause a scene. I only want to speak to Clark. It's neither the time nor the place. Take me, and I'll be discreet. Otherwise, I'll meet him outside when it finishes. Don't do this, Lawrence. Francis tried to appeal to his better nature. I have to. As you would if you were in my position. Then don't involve me. And don't involve the lodge. I don't know where he lives, and I cannot wait until Monday. Francis stood and walked to the window. He stared across the garden, watching the rosy hues of the rising sun as he tried to think of the least worse option. "Are you determined to push the boundaries of our friendship to this degree?" he asked. Lawrence bowed his head and shielded his eyes as he mulled over the dilemma. His behavior was unreasonable, and he knew it. But it had taken 8 years to confront the details of Catherine's death, and now that he'd started, he could not stop. "I'm determined to do whatever it takes," he said finally. "I hope that as my friend you will understand. I would not put you in this position for any other reason, but I must speak to Superintendent Clark. I give you my word that I will not embarrass you, and I will not confront him. I will only ask him what he knew in a calm and orderly manner." Francis nodded. "Very well. Go home and get dressed into something suitable. I will sign you in, and you will tell anyone who asks that you have a current membership with another lodge. I will vouch for you, but please do not damage my reputation." "Thank you, Francis," said Lawrence, rising and touching him on the arm. "You are a good friend." Francis nodded. "Meet me outside the lodge at 12:15. Don't be late." Lawrence arrived in Checker Square a fraction before midday. He had already searched through his old trunk in the eaves of his apartment in the hope that he still had some Masonic regalia left. Lawrence had lost many of his possessions in the house fire, but the trunk and its contents had survived. He found the Masonic clothing squashed inside a canvas bag below some educational books. After a quick shake and a half-hearted press with an unheated iron, they were more or less wearable. He was now standing by the obelisk in Checker Square, dressed in a crumpled lambswool Masonic apron. A couple of jewels were pinned to his breast pocket, both of which had seen better days. Lawrence had never progressed beyond the first degree of Masonry, much to the chagrin of his father. He had been willing to dedicate time to charitable activities, but found the ceremony and tradition of the Masonic rituals tedious. He didn't see the point. But as a police inspector, Masonry was almost mandatory, and it wasn't easy to progress without membership. Lawrence deplored the practice of secret handshakes, but it was an inevitable part of his world. Handshakes were regularly delivered and conveyed the rank of a person concerned. Even to someone as unambitious as Lawrence, it was disconcerting to learn someone's status without a single word being uttered. He always dreaded being the recipient of a handshake from a senior lodge member with influence and connections while on police duty. Lawrence loitered around the obelisk for 20 minutes, waiting for Francis to arrive. Finally, he saw him in the distance walking down Angel Hill and set off to greet him. Francis sported a colourful pale blue and burgundy collar with matching apron and an impressive array of lodge jewels. He looked Lawrence up and down and sighed, "That's not what I had in mind, Lawrence. You could have made more of an effort." "It's the best I can do," muttered Lawrence, flushing. He dressed smartly by inclination and was not proud of the condition of his regalia despite his apathy towards Masonry. Now he could add self-consciousness to his growing list of problems. "Come on, then," said Francis, striding towards the Royal St. Edmund Lodge. Inside, the manorial room had barely changed since Lawrence had last seen it weeks before the grand opening almost 5 years earlier. The only significant difference was the temporary addition of 2 long rows of tables and chairs in the inner temple. A further table bridged the gap at the top of the room. Near it, a smartly dressed man with slicked-back hair leaned over while he rearranged the cutlery. His suit was plain, with no indicators of Freemasonry. "Good afternoon, Baxter," said Francis. "Is everything ready?" "Almost, sir," he replied. "Colonel Dade is unwell and will not be attending. I was changing the place settings to give you more room." "Good," said Francis. "Mr. Harpham is unexpectedly joining us. Please change them back again and sit him next to me. Where have you put Brother Clark?" "Over there, sir." Baxter pointed to a position at the far end of the table. Francis nodded. Clark would be too distant for Lawrence to disturb him over dinner. The meal might not turn into the disaster he feared after all. "Stay here," he said to Lawrence. The other lodge members will be arriving shortly, and I must greet them." Lawrence strolled around the outside of the room, while Francis made his way to the entrance hall. After 5 minutes, he heard the low murmur of voices as guests arrived. He almost lost his composure when he saw the first entrant through the doorway. It was the familiar face of Superintendent Clark, who recognized Lawrence immediately. "Harpham! Good Lord, how are you? It's been a long time." Lawrence held out his hand, unsure of what to say. He had expected to be angry at the sight of his former superintendent, but Clark's greeting was cordial, and there was no reason for it to be otherwise. "Good to see you, sir," he said from force of habit. "No need for that here," said William Clark. "It's good to see you back among us. I know you're working in town as a private investigator now, but we never see you anymore." "I left the Masons," said Lawrence, then, following Francis's earlier instructions, corrected himself, "but I rejoined again when I was working in London." "Capital," said Clark as the room began to fill with men in full Masonic dress. The number of men that he recognized came as a surprise to Lawrence. He seemed to be the only one who had moved on, leaving the Masons behind. Francis spotted him talking to Clark across the room and weaved his way over. "Almost time to sit down," he said, guiding William Clark away. Lawrence grimaced. He was desperate to speak to Clark privately, but it had been an inopportune time. There were too many people milling around. Reluctantly, he took his place at the table, almost as far away from Clark as it was possible to get. Luncheon was a cold buffet brought straight to the table, with no money spared in the preparation. Generous portions of raised game pie and plates of ham and tongue adorned the table, with baskets of pastries and pots of strawberries in jelly to finish. The delicious spread was small consolation for the series of boring speeches that followed. Lawrence had forgotten what a self-congratulatory bunch the Masons could be. Though he appreciated their charitable endeavors, the constant referencing of individual achievements left him wondering how much altruism existed outside of their egos. He fidgeted as he listened, each word preventing swift completion of his task. Finally, the members stood for a toast, and the formalities were over. Lawrence watched as William Clark shook hands with one of the blue-collared master Freemasons beside him before making his way to the door. It was now or never. Lawrence bolted from behind the table and negotiated his way through the crowd. Clark was not in the hallway or the opposite room, so he darted outside to see him striding up Crown Street. "Wait!" he yelled. William Clark stopped in his tracks and turned around. "Hello again, Lawrence," Clark said politely. "Are you walking this way?" "Yes, I am," said Lawrence. "Do you mind if I join you?" "Not at all," said Clark. "Although you'll have to shake a leg. I have another appointment. Bad planning on my part." "In that case, I will come straight to the point. I have a question concerning the events of May Day 87, when Catherine and Lily died." William Clark stopped walking. "Ask me anything and I will do my utmost to answer. I will never forget that dark day." Lawrence cleared his throat. "It has recently come to my notice that somebody raised the possibility of arson at the time of their deaths." "I see." Superintendent Clark nodded and began walking again. His pace was slow, and he bowed his head in concentration. "Who gave you this information? Does it matter?" "No, I suppose not." "But whoever mentioned it did you a disservice. The matter of arson was briefly speculated upon, but did not amount to anything substantial in the end. Why? Why was it considered, or why was it discounted? Both. I will tell you, Lawrence, but don't read too much into it. You probably remember that the fire began at night. The fire brigade arrived and extinguished it after several hours. It was all over by daylight. Now, do you remember Police Constable Brame? Yes. Wasn't Brame's beat in Livermere? Eventually. But at the time, Brame worked in Bury, anyway. He was the constable sent to secure your property and keep your surviving possessions safe while you were in the hospital. I didn't know, said Lawrence. I owe him my thanks. And you for sending him. I remember very little about the events of that awful night. Naturally. William Clark smiled sympathetically. But how is this relevant? P.C. Brame spent several hours waiting outside your property while the workmen cleared as many of your effects as they could salvage. I don't know if you returned before they pulled the building down, but the rooms overlooking your garden were largely unscathed. I never returned. I could not bear the thought of it. I'm sure I would have done the same under similar circumstances, but as I said, Brame was there for some time. On his return, he gave a statement, and in that statement he noted the presence of several matches beside your boot scraper, some burnt out and some intact. Not lucifers either, but red phosphorus safety matches. Lawrence frowned. I cannot think of any reason for struck matches to be near my front door. Did you not have a lantern on your wall? No, it was not necessary. The street lamp was directly outside my house, and there was no reason for more light. Did you investigate why they were there? We did. Brame's report arrived on my desk the very next day. I searched him out, and we both returned to your home, but the matches had gone. Not one remained, nor any evidence that they had ever been there. Good God, man, isn't that evidence in itself? Clark pursed his lips. No, it is not. There was no other indication that the fire could have been deliberate, none whatsoever. That is why I took the decision not to tell you to avoid any further distress. But what about the matches? Only Brame ever saw them. He could have been mistaken, or perhaps they belonged to somebody else. If there had been any other sign of arson, we would have made a thorough investigation. I deeply regret that someone has seen fit to tell you of this matter. Trust me when I say that there was nothing in it. Chapter 24. Another Letter. Lawrence turned without another word and walked back in the direction of Checker Square, his mind ablaze with questions. Every instinct in his body was alive, tortured by the significance of the matches. He had known P.C. Brame for a long time, and they had worked together once or twice. Brame was a good man and experienced. If he said that he saw matches, then he did, and if he thought they were worthy of mention in his statement, then it should have been taken seriously. There were only two possible explanations. Either Brame had been wrong, which Lawrence doubted, or someone else removed the matches. A passer-by could have picked them up to use, but if that had happened, what became of the burnt ones? Perhaps the wind blew them away. But would bad weather dislodge them all? Lawrence shut his eyes and tried to remember what the weather had been like that week. Nothing came to mind. He had been in so much pain that he could hardly remember his name, much less whether there was a high wind or not. Lawrence found himself outside his office in Buttermarket, having walked there without thinking. He looked through the window and saw the familiar shape of Annie Hutchinson leaning over his desk. Lawrence wondered what she was doing there so late on a Saturday afternoon. He considered walking past rather than disturb her, but loitered for a moment, then thought better of it and went inside. "Good Lord!" Annie exclaimed, clutching her hand to her chest. She picked up a sheet of paper and fanned her face. "You frightened me to death," she continued. "There I was, singing to myself like a proper Charlie." "I didn't hear you," said Lawrence, smiling. "It's not your usual day," he continued. "No, sir, I didn't come in yesterday. My sister Mary was visiting from London, and I spent the day with her. I thought you wouldn't mind as long as I cleaned up today." "I don't mind at all," said Lawrence. "Have you much left to do?" "No, I'm almost finished. I'll make you a drink, and then I'll leave you in peace. Your post is on the mantelpiece." "Thank you." Lawrence collected the small pile of letters stacked against the clock, then returned to his desk. He discarded 3 brown envelopes and stared at the remaining 2. One was a plain white envelope with no stamp, and the other bore a Liverpool postmark. Lawrence stared at the white envelope for a long time. It was disturbingly familiar. He waited until Annie deposited a cup of coffee on his desk, then made his way to the kitchen while she tidied her cleaning materials away. It took no time to steam the envelope open. Inside, exactly as he anticipated, was another copy of Catherine's crest. The word hidden beneath the gummed-down envelope flap was different. It read, "Betrayed." Lawrence gritted his teeth. The first crest had released an unbearable sadness. This time it made him angry. Lawrence strode into his office and waved the envelope in front of Annie. "Did you see who delivered this?" he asked. "No, sir. It was on the doormat when I arrived." "Is it important?" "No," said Lawrence curtly. "I'm sorry." He continued, "I don't mean to be rude." Annie blinked in surprise. She had witnessed him losing his temper often, but had never heard him apologize. Lawrence examined the crest one more time, expecting an overwhelming sense of loss again with the weighty blow of regret. But fury boiled inside him instead. Somebody was deliberately trying to make him suffer. It had worked the first time, but they had gone too far, and it had nullified the effect. Devastation had turned to irritation and weakness to strength. He felt buoyed in the certain knowledge that the perpetrator was a living, breathing person and not a ghost from the past. He slit open the second envelope with a brass letter opener and removed the single sheet of paper inside. It contained a warrant to visit William Miller in Walton Jail. Miller must have something to tell him, or why would he bother? It was a sign. He should go to Liverpool and continue with the Moyes investigation. The identity of the anonymous letter sender and the matter of the arson suspicion could wait a while longer. Lawrence scribbled a few words onto a sheet of paper and passed it to Annie. "Drop this at the post office on your way out," he said. Chapter 25. Alone Again. Saturday, May 18th, 1895, 4:30 p.m. To Miss Violet Smith, Crown Hotel, Dis, from Miss Hutchinson, Buttermarket, Bury St. Edmunds. Good afternoon, Miss Violet. Mr. Harpham has finished in Bury and is proceeding directly to Liverpool. He will arrive back in Dis on Tuesday. Chapter 26. Alfred Wiley. Sunday, May 19th, 1895. There were rough times and smooth in every occupation, but Violet felt fortunate as she sauntered along St. Nicholas Street on her way to Market Hill. She had woken to a sunny day, having attended the Corn Hall alone the previous evening, where she had delighted in the operetta. While Violet would have enjoyed Lawrence's company, she had become too independent to be reliant upon it. Violet had arrived alone, but it was not long before she was engaged in small talk both before and after the performance. It had been a splendid evening, and today had started well too. Unsure how to locate Alfred Wiley, she had asked Minnie Panks. Minnie rewarded her with enough information to find him and the bonus of a potted history of his background. Minnie was a tremendous asset. She had a sound knowledge of many of the townsfolk, whether high-ranking or ordinary, and the guileless way she gave information without requiring an explanation in return was both useful and endearing. So now, Violet was on her way to Rose Cottage in Mount Street, expecting to find Alfred tending to the extensive, formal gardens at the rear. The property was only a short distance from Market Hill, and she found it with ease. An elaborate ironwork gate led into a pretty courtyard with an arbour covered in sweet-smelling climbing roses in shades of red. She passed through, hoping that she would encounter Alfred before bumping into the owner of the property. It was hard enough to know what to say to Alfred without also having to explain it to his employer. The day continued well when Violet spotted a man digging a trench at the side of the garden who appeared to be the right age for Alfred. She walked towards him and announced herself, and he confirmed his identity. Violet chewed her lip. "Minnie sent me," she said. She thought you might be able to help.
With what?
Violet debated whether to continue with her new persona as a journalist, but the scruffy man in front regarded her with a dour expression, and she didn't think it would impress him. "Do you know Fanny Nunn?" she blurted out. His mouth set into a thin line until his lips almost vanished.
"What business is it of yours?"
he asked, thrusting the spade into the ground. "It isn't exactly," she said in a faltering voice.
"Then leave me alone."
"But I need your help."
"You need to go before I set the dogs on you."
Violet scanned the garden. There wasn't a dog in sight. Wiley was blustering, and it gave her the confidence to continue. "I'm not going to try and deceive you," she said.
"That's good of you."
He scowled at her with undisguised contempt. "I am sorry. I appear to have upset you, and it's quite understandable given the circumstances of your loss. But I'm not being nosy. I could make up a reason for my questions, but the truth of the matter is that Fanny's name has appeared in a diary in unusual circumstances. I don't know why, and I would like to understand what happened to your sweetheart. Everyone I meet is reluctant to speak about her, apart from Mrs. Nunn, that is." Alfred grunted, turned his back on Violet, and picked up the spade before resuming his task. Violet sighed. She had never encountered a circumstance where her natural empathy failed to gain trust, and by now the conversation was usually flowing. She considered leaving, then noticed that her shoe buckle was hanging by a thread. Violet pulled the buckle off and dropped it into her bag, then stood with her arms crossed and a sullen expression on her face. She waited and watched Alfred Wiley dig. After a few moments, he stopped.
"Are you still here?"
he growled. "Obviously."
"I should throw you off the property."
"If you were going to, you would have done it already." He moved towards her and lowered the spade.
"You're spargy."
"Like Fanny," he said. "That's the first time anybody has described her character," said Violet. "Sparky. It makes her sound like a real person."
"She was a real person and full of life," said Wiley. "Until that last week. I could tell you a lot about Fanny Nunn."
"Then why don't you? Fanny deserves better than to be forgotten." He stared into the distance, as if conjuring up a memory.
"Walk with me," he said.
"Where?"
"I'll show you."
He continued, striding through the rose arbour. Violet walked behind him, frowning in trepidation. Moments before, he had threatened to evict her from the garden. Now she was obediently following him to goodness knows where.
"This way,"
he said, turning left. Violet struggled to keep up as he marched down Mount Street. She was panting with exertion by the time they arrived in Haywood Road, some 10 minutes later.
"Here,"
he said, pointing to a long pathway. It led to a flint-covered church with a large archway to the cemetery beyond. They walked through and towards a small plot under a low-boughed tree.
"This is where she lies."
Violet lowered her head respectfully, wondering why he had brought her to this lonely cemetery. But two elderly ladies were paying their respects by a tall gravestone only a few yards beyond, which gave her a sense of security.
"Oh, I shouldn't do this,"
said Alfred, perching on the edge of a weathered marble tomb.
"It's not right using a man's grave for a seat, but I often sit here and talk to Fanny. I tell her about my day. I never married, you know. We were only young and foolish, but she was the right girl for me."
"I'm sorry for your loss," said Violet, feeling empathy towards him for the first time.
"You sit here," said Alfred. "I'll stand. It's not right to sit in the presence of a lady. Sorry that it's not more suitable."
"It will do well enough," said Violet. Sitting on a tomb might be disrespectful, but he had set off so fast that she'd almost run to keep up. Now she needed to take the weight off her hot and swollen feet.
"I'll tell you about Fanny," he said. "Good and bad alike. She was not perfect, not by a long way. But she did not deserve to die. Where do you want me to start?
Tell me what happened on the night she died.
Alfred took a deep breath. I was in the market room at the Crown all night. It's one of the drinking areas, but it's quieter than the other public room. Fanny and I were having a beer with my friends. She liked to drink.
Was she in good spirits?
Not really. The old bitch was sending her away, and she didn't want to go.
Did she have to leave? He nodded.
Fanny had no choice. No money of her own, you see. And with younger children in the house, her mother didn't want her.
Too many mouths to feed.
So the mother said. But she didn't want for money of her own. She took all the profits from the inn and had recently received a legacy. Fanny expected to get some money, but her mother would not part with so much as a farthing.
Did she help Mrs. Nunn to keep the inn?
Sometimes. Though her mother did not always pay for her services. As I said, Fanny liked to drink, and on occasion she would have too many and get up late the next day. Her mother said she was fat and lazy, and true enough, she was a well-built girl, but a comely lass all the same.
Was she unhappy that evening?
Thanks for being here. This is a free audiobook made with care. While the music plays, give yourself a little kindness. You deserve it.
You could say that, but she was not devastated. She did not want to leave me. But she knew that I would not stray, and that she could return at the weekend.
And you don't know of any other reason why she might have been unhappy?
As I said, she was still mithering about the money in the will that she believed was intended for her. And she'd been quieter than usual for a few days, as if something was on her mind.
Violet licked her lips before choosing her words carefully. Do you think Fanny might have taken her own life?
I don't know. I did not think so at the time.
Even though she was quieter than usual?
She wasn't especially unhappy. More pensive than anything. As if something was playing on her mind.
And she didn't tell you what it was?
No. And I wouldn't have listened if she had, he admitted. We were all too jolly. The ale was flowing and the conversation was light-hearted. Fanny laughed with us, too, when she wasn't fidgeting and staring out of the window.
When did you last see her?
A few minutes past 11, it was. I left the two brewers with a couple of the other lads. Fanny grabbed me by the arm as I walked towards the door and said, Alf, I want to speak to you.
Even though you had been together all night?
Yes, I suppose Fanny wanted to say something privately.
And did she?
Eventually. Fanny pulled me back into the market room, which was empty by then, and burst into tears. I asked her what was wrong, and she did not reply. Instead, she reached into her pocket and pulled out a small parcel wrapped in brown paper. She shook it, and I heard a few coins jingle. There are £30 in here, she said.
I thought she had no money.
She didn't. That parcel couldn't possibly have contained £30. At most, it was £1 or two.
Did she show you?
No, but Fanny told me that if the £30 weren't in there now, they would be by the time I saw it next.
How strange. Was Fanny expecting some money?
I don't think so, but she was behaving oddly. She said that if I saw her at the weekend, we could treat ourselves, and if I did not, I would find the packet in her ulster coat pocket the following morning. It would be 20 yards from Mr. Muskett's staith in the mere, under the weeping willow.
And was it?
No. I searched for it when I knew Fanny had drowned, and I scoured the area more than once. There was no sign of the package, and I had heard it said that she was wearing her Ulster coat when they pulled her from the mere.
Did she say anything else before you parted?
She gave me a note as I left, said Alfred. It was dark outside, so I made no attempt to read it, but put it in my greatcoat pocket. I told her I would see her when she returned from Norwich, waved her goodbye, and went home, thinking no more about it.
Was that the last time you saw her?
Alfred nodded. Yes, it was. Then Inspector Amos called me up just after 7 the next morning. I opened the window and asked what he wanted, and he replied that Fanny was missing from her mother's house, and there was a body in the mere.
How dreadful.
It was. I knew it must be Fanny. And I remembered the envelope she'd given me the previous night. I opened it and showed it to the inspector.
What did it say?
Nothing. It contained a likeness of Fanny. She wanted me to remember her.
He reached into his breast pocket and removed a battered leather wallet held together with a cord. He untied it and removed a piece of paper.
Here.
The tomb upon which Violet was sitting lay in shadow from the trees above. She stood and moved towards the pathway and into the sunlight before looking at the paper. It contained a pencil sketch of a well-built, homely-looking girl with dark eyes and hair. She turned it over, but there was nothing on the reverse. "Thank you," she said, handing it back to Alfred. He tucked it into the wallet and carefully folded the cord around. "What do you think happened to Fanny?" she asked.
I suppose she was more unhappy than I realized, he said, sighing. I did not notice at the time, but I was younger then, and selfish in my ways.
You think she took her own life?
He nodded. I suppose it is the only explanation. Why else would Fanny leave me her likeness?
It is a good question, said Violet, but it doesn't explain why she told you where to find her money. Did it ever turn up?
There was no money, said Alfred, and there was nowhere for her to get it. She made it up. She wasn't in her right mind that night and must have known what she was going to do. It was a long time ago now. Let the poor girl lie.
He nodded towards Fanny's grave and touched his cap.
I must go now, or Mr. Brooks will notice my absence.
Thank you, said Violet. I do appreciate you talking to me. She watched as Alfred Wiley walked briskly away and thought about how lonely he must have been. He appeared to be in his 40s, and there was time enough to find love again if he wanted to. Then, snapping out of her reverie, Violet spotted a clump of bluebells beside a tree. She picked a bunch and placed them on Fanny's grave before leaving the cemetery, head bowed in contemplation. Alfred Wiley's explanation was convincing, and he had known Fanny very well. But the mention of £30 troubled her. Fanny was either a fantasist or was expecting money. But from whom? By the time Violet returned to the Crown, she had talked herself out of believing Alfred's theory. Fanny's death was far from solved, and Violet was as baffled as ever. Chapter 27. A Bad Year for the Young. Violet was still pondering the meaning of love as she walked back to the town. Romance had largely evaded her, which was hardly surprising. She had spent the better part of her 40 years in domestic servitude to others, first as a governess and later as a companion to several elderly ladies. There had been a young man once, a fleeting romance which had fizzled out almost as quickly as it began. She had not been particularly upset, and had soon realized that their attachment was not as strong as she'd initially thought. Employment as a lady's companion had been rewarding and never strenuous, but it was solitary, and Violet rarely found the opportunity to mix with suitable young men. She had not been unduly concerned to begin with, But as she left her 20s and 30s behind, the passing of time became more apparent. By the time she reached her 40s, she had reconciled herself to the solitude of spinsterhood and was, for the most, content. But it was an uneasy peace. Loneliness could strike at any moment. She shrugged off her thoughts and entered the Crown Hotel, hanging her hat and coat on the stand before entering the dining room for a light lunch. A jam tart followed bread, cheese, and a slice of brawn. She patted her bodice after eating, convinced that her waist was thickening. Violet had never been slight, but neither was she plump. She was fortunate in having an hourglass figure and was still wearing dresses that fit her 20 years ago. Violet examined the backs of her hands as she pondered, clenching them to hide the ugly veins that were becoming more prominent. She couldn't quite straighten her fingers anymore. Not the ring and little finger, anyway. She was starting to look matronly, but was sensible enough not to be unduly concerned. Violet stood and made her way into the sitting room, hoping that it would be quiet. She wanted to read her book, but not alone in her room. 1 or 2 companions in the lounge would be ideal, but when Violet opened the door, a buzz of noise indicated it was full. She turned away, and then a friendly voice shouted her over. "Miss Smith, do come and join us." It was Arthur Thompson. He waved at her from the other side of the room. Harry Aldrich and Joseph Pope were sitting beside him. Their faces were solemn, and they appeared less animated than usual. "How are you?" she asked, pleased to see their familiar faces. "Not so good," said Harry, "but better now you are here to take our minds off it." Violet smiled. She wanted to ask what was wrong, but it was evident that Harry did not want to discuss it. "Are you here on business or pleasure?" she asked. "It's the Lord's Day, so we must be here for pleasure," said Joseph Pope, with none of his usual jocularity. "And a little business," said Arthur. "We are having an informal meeting of the Oddfellows." Harry Aldrich flashed him a glance, but Arthur ignored it. "On a Sunday?" Violet teased. "As long as we've been to church, the Lord will forgive us, and we did," said Harry. The men fell silent again, and Violet began to feel uncomfortable and wished she had retired to her room. "What have you been doing today?" asked Arthur. "Have you enjoyed the fine weather?" Violet smiled. "I took a stroll along Haywood Road," she said, "and I found myself in the cemetery. It is a beautiful resting place." "It's getting rather full," said Joseph glumly. Violet cocked her head. "What do you mean?" "I think he is referring to the children's graves," said Harry. "It's not been a good year for the youngsters." "In what way?" "There was an outbreak of smallpox earlier in the year," said Harry. "It took a few adults, but many more children. Then last week little Doris Edwards died, and today we found out that young Samuel Granger drowned in the well." "Poor little chap." Violet's hands flew to her mouth. "What a terrible thing to happen." Harry nodded. "It looks like he fell in and couldn't get out again. His mother is distraught. And she's a widow, too." "What will she do?" "We will look after her," said Joseph. "Her husband was one of us, and she still pays her dues. There will be enough to bury the little fellow, and a bit more besides." "Does she have other children?" "Plenty," Joseph replied. "Not as many as George Fairweather, but she's lost 3 and still has 5. "A hard life," Violet murmured, thinking about her childhood. She was one of 3, and her mother one of 2. They were a small family and had been fortunate enough never to have suffered the loss of a child. Violet could only imagine the pain. "Let us speak of happier things," said Harry Aldrich, banging his hand down on the table. "It's the spring fair on Wednesday afternoon. Are you coming?" "I would love to. Where is it?" "By the Mere, near Late's Coach Builders." "I know it," said Violet. "I will be there." "And bring Reverend Michael, too." Violet nodded. She would be meeting Michael later and was looking forward to it. Alfred Wiley's loneliness had made her wistful for the family life that had passed her by. After tales of smallpox and a little boy's drowning, she was more than ready to indulge in something pleasurable. Chapter 28. Miller Talks. Lawrence dropped his overnight bag in the upstairs room of the boarding house. He had opted to stay there on the spur of the moment after leaving the railway station. It was a last-minute decision over which Lawrence had agonized, having intended initially to lodge with his uncle. As the journey progressed and the train drew closer to Liverpool, he'd begun to dread the prospect of making small talk. Staying with his uncle was a sensible option, but as he started walking towards Lord Street, he realized he couldn't go through with it. There would be too many questions. The minute he arrived, his uncle would ask why he was back in Liverpool so soon. An explanation would be unavoidable, and he was still preoccupied with Catherine. He wasn't in a fit state of mind to insert himself into the domestic bliss in which his uncle and Connie now dwelled. So he had changed direction and applied to a lodging house near to the prison. Now, as he drew the curtains and gazed out of the dirty window onto Rawcliffe Road, he wondered whether he had made the right decision. The room smelled damp, the bed squeaked when he placed his bag on it, and the wallpaper was peeling. Still, it would only be for one night. Lawrence reached into his jacket pocket and rechecked the visiting warrant. He was due to see Miller at 2:30 in the afternoon. If he left now, he would arrive too early, but anything was better than being stuck in this room longer than necessary. Besides, it was sunny outside, and the walk would be pleasant. He returned down the staircase, taking care not to touch the banister, which was thick with grime. As he reached the bottom stair, the door to the living room opened and the landlady appeared wearing a dark dress, her hair concealed beneath a lace cap. Her thin face was set in a scowl. "I'll be locking the door at 10:30, she said. "Don't be late, or you'll spend the night on the doorstep." "I'll be back by 10, said Lawrence, putting his hat on and feeling aggrieved. He was in his 40s and the landlady had treated him like a child. If he hadn't already paid, he would have packed his bags and left. Instead, he politely requested directions. "Where is Hornby Road?" he asked. "Hornby Road is very long," said the landlady. "Where do you want to go?" "The jail," he said without thinking, then sighed, knowing what she would assume. She looked him up and down and pursed her lips before opening the front door. "Go left until you reach the bottom of the road, cross over and through the cemetery. You can't miss it," she said, crossing her arms under her chest. She stared at him accusingly. "Is it a relative?" "Who?" "The man you are visiting." Lawrence restrained himself from telling her to mind her own business. "It's a professional matter," he said. Her thin lips relaxed, and she uncrossed her arms. "I see. Don't be late." She returned through the door without a backward glance, and Lawrence walked down the street, glad to be away from the dingy house. Lawrence entered the jail, relieved to be there with official authority for once. Though he had achieved his objective on the previous visit, it had not been without risks, and had created a different problem. An eagle-eyed guard might spot the similarity between his photographer guise and his real identity. But Lawrence had thought ahead. The possibility of being recognized had occurred to him en route to Mrs. Bramwell's lodging establishment. He had located a public convenience and applied the moustache he habitually carried and was wearing it when he entered. The landlady had been none the wiser, and he expected it to pass without scrutiny from the jail staff. But for all the years Lawrence had worn the moustache, it remained tickly and uncomfortable. He would have preferred to leave it behind. Lawrence approached the building confidently, walked to the entrance, and presented the warrant. The guard grunted and directed him through the courtyard to a room at the front of the inner building. After 10 minutes, another guard appeared, handcuffed to Miller. He nodded to Lawrence, unfastened the cuff, and sat in the corner, watching them. Miller took a seat opposite Lawrence and nodded his head. William Miller had lost a considerable amount of weight since they'd last met. His bloodshot eyes stared from a thin, gaunt face, the right eye twitching uncontrollably. The haunted look of a condemned man had replaced the calm demeanour he had presented before. "How are you keeping?" asked Lawrence. "How do you think?" Miller's Liverpool accent was strong and his voice gruff. "I'm gonna swing. How would you feel?" Lawrence ignored the question. "Did you do it?" Miller glanced towards the guard. "Don't I get any privacy?" The guard crossed his legs and unfurled a newspaper without speaking. Miller shook his head. "I don't want to talk in front of the guard." "You don't have much choice, and it's too late to matter." "Thank you for the reminder," said Miller bitterly. He stared at the floor without speaking. Lawrence began to wonder that his visit might be fruitless. "Why have you asked me here? Do you need my help?" "Not exactly." "Well, then why?" "I'll be dead in 2 weeks. I want to put my affairs in order." "Go on." Miller swallowed. His mouth and eye were twitching in tandem. "I did it," he said. "I'm guilty as sin, and I will die like the dog that I am." Lawrence regarded him with a furrowed brow. He had expected a declaration of innocence, not a bold confession. "Then I'm not sure how I can help," he said. "You can listen," said Miller. "I will tell you exactly what I did and why I did it. I am resigned to my fate and deserve nothing less. There is a reason why I killed Moyes and attacked the boy. I wasn't going to confess while there was a chance that I might get away with it. But since the trial I've tried to tell my story. And now nobody believes me." "Start from the beginning," said Lawrence. "Why did you go to the Moyes house?" "It was like this," said Miller. "Last year I left Sissy, my wife. I have always liked women, and for some reason they like me. I cannot resist the thrill of it, you see. I started seeing a married woman last year. Her name was Mrs. Goss, and she had money, lots of it. I stayed with her until the money ran out. Then I took her last few coins and came home." "You abandoned her?" Miller bowed his head.